Chapter 1259. Li Jinyan was a lot calmer in the face of the whale's excitement. Although his expression was still indifferent, from the way he stared at the various parameters, it was more or less obvious that his heart wasn't as calm as his expression. Hypoxia could cause headaches, fatigue, difficulty walking, panic, shortness of breath, chest tightness, and pulmonary edema. In severe cases, it could even lead to death. Regardless of whether it was high altitude or underwater, hypoxia was a problem that humans had been unable to overcome since ancient times. And the frogmen mostly carried out underwater missions. In the selection competition, the duration of hypoxia tolerance played an extremely important role in the selection competition, and it could even decide whether to stay or leave. Li Jinyan stared at the gradually rising numbers and calmly glanced at the time. A dark light gradually condensed in his cold eyes, and finally converged into a stream of light that was as bright as a winter night. Almost there, almost there, almost there. Whale did not notice the change in his expression. His eyes were fixed on the display screen, and his expression was so nervous that it was as if he was in the selection competition himself. The first beep sounded at the set time, and Whale was so excited that he almost jumped out of his chair. Li Jinyan, who was standing behind him, raised his hand and pressed on his shoulder. Only then did he not lose his composure. 5 minutes, Demon King. She did it. The numbers haven't turned red yet. Whale said excitedly, as if he had discovered a treasure. His eyes were shining, as if they were bursting with light. She has surpassed the soldiers we left behind. Very good. 5 minutes had passed. Just as Whale said, she had indeed surpassed the 24 soldiers left behind. The numbers are starting to rise. Remove the device. Li Jinyan's expression did not change at all, but when he put one hand on the table, his slender fingers tightened slightly. Give me the results after the high CO2 reaction test. Keep an eye on it. When the numbers turn red, immediately turn off the device. Whale saw that the captain, who was younger than him, was still calm. He realized that he had lost his composure, so he cleared his throat and whispered, "It's rare to meet someone who can withstand hypoxia for 5 minutes. I will definitely be careful." As the device on his arm was removed, Yi Qian, whose upper limbs had been freed, immediately felt the locked blood rush to his arm. The heavy feeling of having a few mountains on his left and right shoulders, as well as the separation of his upper and lower limbs, instantly disappeared. Taking off her mask, Yi Qian, whose face was as red as the sunset, did not immediately open her mouth to take deep breaths. Her delicate lips slightly pouted, and she slowly and rhythmically took deep breaths. Then, she let her whole body breathe in and out in sync with her breathing, and slowly relaxed. The lack of oxygen for 5 minutes was like walking back from the gates of hell. Large droplets of sweat were still dripping from his back. The sweat on his forehead had gathered into small streams, dripping down his chin and onto his lapels. The big mermaid, who had been keeping watch, took a deep breath before breaking the silence in the room. Not bad, 5 minutes and 24 seconds. Although its voice was soft, there were obvious fluctuations. It could be seen that the big mermaid was a little excited. 5 minutes. A qualified frogman's hypoxia training lasted 5 minutes. How could he not be excited? But she quickly sobered up. No matter how excited she was, she belonged to the army. Yi Qian had been counting the time in her heart. When she heard the big mermaid's words, she smiled and said, "My arm is tied to the device. Otherwise, I could have lasted 6 minutes. 6 minutes is my limit." When she was training with Principal Chen at the beach, she could only hold her breath for 2 minutes at first. Later on, when she was training at the altitude, Uncle Chen made her wear a mask for morning exercises. She wore a mask when she went down to the lake on the plateau. Even when she slept, he asked her to wear a mask. That was how she achieved her current results. Chapter 1260. 6 minutes was Yi Qian's limit, but for many people, 6 minutes of lack of oxygen underwater was enough to kill them. Big Mermaid sighed deeply in her heart again, then she focused on the second test. No matter how good she was, she would not belong to the Navy, nor would she belong to the Storm Commandos. However, if a female soldier could surpass a male soldier, whether she belonged to her own unit or not, it was still something to be excited about. Yi Qian did not know that the Great Mermaid's heart was in turmoil. She walked out of the testing room and quickly adjusted her body to enter the high C02 tolerance and adaptation test. This was a compulsory training for the frogmen, and also one of the tests for the Storm Commandos. This is our C02 tolerance training form, take a look. Big Mermaid, who accompanied and recorded the whole process, stood in the clear water and said to Yi Qian, who was already prepared, "Your breathing time will decrease by 15 seconds, but the time you can hold your breath will remain the same. We have 30 minutes of testing, you may feel a little uncomfortable, and you may even experience nausea and vomiting. There is a coral archipelago below, you need to dive to the bottom of it, which is about 15 meters from the surface. Remember, Yi Qian, we need to record your best personal score and your worst score. In 30 minutes, I want to know if your average score is passing." High CO2 was a dangerous test for diving underwater without any air source. When Yi Qian held her breath and dove to the bottom of the sea, she closed her eyes and kept her breathing tight, swimming like a fish to the bottom of the sea. The oxygen content in her blood began to decrease, and the high concentration of CO2 gradually made her body uncomfortable. Her diaphragm muscles began to twitch, telling Yi Qian that she needed to breathe, needed to rise to the surface to get oxygen. Relax, relax, the body must relax, let the body and mind not be afraid of the gradually increasing CO2 content in the body, listen to the sound of the water, feel the joy of the fish swimming by, and avoid being disturbed by fear and other factors. When the oxygen content in her blood reached the limit, Yi Qian quickly rose to the surface. Don't rest for too long, otherwise the C02 accumulated will be expelled from the body because of the long rest, and you won't be able to accumulate high C02. Once you float to the surface for more than 30 seconds, the cumulative effect of C02 will be very bad. Yi Qian, you need to take a breath within 20 seconds and dive back into the sea. Big Mermaid's strict voice kept reminding Yi Qian. He held a timer in one hand, waiting for Yi Qian to take a breath and dive back into the sea, and his expression would become more serious. 20 seconds for breath was actually quite harsh for a recruit, but he really wanted to know if Yi Qian could surpass a recruit, so he took the risk of taking a breath in 20 seconds. To the recruits, taking a breath in 20 seconds was a little dangerous, but to the Storm Commandos, taking a breath in 20 seconds was a long time. During the whole breathing process, every breath would exchange the air in the lungs. The frogmen rested for 15 seconds and immediately entered the next round of high C02. Giving Yi Qian an extra 5 seconds was what Big Mermaid finally found to be feasible and conservative after a few rounds of testing. Yi Qian dived 15 meters into the sea in one breath, held his breath for 2 minutes, and then rushed back up to rest for 15 seconds. This cycle continued for 30 minutes, and when the entire test was over, even the hard-working Yi Qian felt as if all the energy in his body had been sucked out. Big Mermaid looked at the female soldier who was completely drenched, but still maintained the pride of a soldier, and then looked at the record on the form. His Adam's apple lightly moved up and down a few times. This kind of record was enough to make their comrades' jaws drop. Chapter 1261. Soon, Yi Qian's HCA02 tolerance test form was handed over to Li Jinyan, who was on the phone. Looking at the data on the form, the usually cold Demon King could not help but raise his eyebrows. A female soldier who could be appreciated by Xia Jinyuan was indeed a little different. How is it? Is she qualified enough to stay? The dignified voice of the Navy Commander-in-Chief came from the phone. He was asking about Yi Qian. Early in the morning, you didn't give the female soldiers any time to recover. Instead, you ran with the male soldiers while carrying weights and then started a high-pressure test. Li Jinyan, you're too bold. The physical fitness of the female soldiers was already worse than the male soldiers, and the test was arranged so closely. When the Navy Commander-in-Chief heard about it, he was so scared that he broke out in cold sweat. Putting aside the hypoxia test, they even had to do a half-hour HCA-02 test. Did they treat the female soldiers as members of the Storm Commandos? How audacious! Didn't I tell you? Since the army is determined to send her over, you don't have to care if she's good or not. Just keep her. You have to give face to the army. Since she's here, we'll take her in. As for the results of the training, that's not your problem. It's up to the female soldiers to see if they put in the hard work. Don't be so strict with your requirements. She's a female soldier after all. Could it be that you expect a female soldier to be able to transform into a dragon in the sea, just like you? Wake up, Li Jinyan. No matter if she's good or not, whether she can keep up with your training, you have to fucking keep her. In short, she had to stay. There was no way she could be sent back. The Navy Commander-in-Chief, who did not get any response for a few minutes, took a sip of cold water and prepared to patiently give his subordinates a lesson on the ways of the world. There was nothing wrong with seeking truth from facts, but you have to look at the timing. The selection of the Storm Commandos was very strict. As the Commander-in-Chief, he did not have any objections. In fact, he absolutely agreed. After all, the selected members were going to carry out a life-threatening mission. How could they be sloppy? But Yi Qian was different. She was a soldier from the army. Regardless of whether it was good or bad, the Navy only needed to follow the normal training process and complete the Army's requirements. There was no need to be so serious about it to avoid hurting the harmony between the two. How could Li Jinyan, who was listening quietly, not know what his commander was thinking? It was one thing to know, but it was absolutely impossible for him to do so. Regardless of whether the female soldier was from the army or not, since she had come to his team, he had to treat her seriously. He could not just put on a show. He was being responsible for her and himself. As for whether she succeeded or not, to be honest, he was surprised when he saw the results on the form. Li Jinyan closed the form and his thin lips curled up slightly, revealing a faint smile. He replied indifferently, "It's higher than my expectations." Higher than expected. Was he praising Yi Qian? Did he hear wrongly? The Navy commander, who was originally prepared to persuade his subordinates, looked at him seriously and said, "Oh, it's higher than you expected. Do you think the army has nothing better to do? Do you think they would just find a random person to stuff into your hands?" While he breathed a long sigh of relief in his heart, he said, "To be able to make you say something that's higher than your expectations, it should not be an ordinary person." Li Jinyan became the captain of the Frogman unit at a young age. It was not because of his good life and high education, but because his ability was enough to convince the others. In addition, he was very strict with himself. Every time he trained, he would advance and retreat together with his comrades. Even if the entire training style was harsh, his comrades in the team did not say a word. Everyone was convinced. Chapter 1262. It was harder than ascending to the heavens to find out whether a soldier was good or not from such a talented and capable soldier. This time, when he suddenly said something that had a hidden meaning of praise, the Navy commander's first reaction was to think that he had misheard. That's good, that's good. Finally, he didn't have to worry about him kicking people out of the reef island. After being on tenterhooks for the whole night, he finally felt relieved. He was really afraid that this guy who didn't care about his own family wouldn't give the army any face and would just kick the female soldiers out of the reef. Now, he was finally relieved. Could it be better than what he expected? It seemed that the female soldier sent over was really something. The Navy commander and Li Jinjun both had the same thought before this. The female soldier was outstanding in the army, but it didn't mean that she would be equally outstanding in the frogman unit. They both had this thought and didn't have any hope for Yi Qian at all. The Navy commander thought that as long as they could get along on the surface, he would keep her for the sake of both armies. He would just train her for 50 days and send her back to the army. That way, both sides would be happy. Now that he unexpectedly found out that the female soldier was actually not bad, the Navy commander finally felt relieved and smiled. In that case, I don't have to worry about you kicking her out in the future. Based on her current test results, I don't think she will for the time being. Li Jinyan didn't say anything to reassure the Navy commander. The test only meant that Yi Qian didn't have to be sent back for the time being. Now that it was the second elimination, if she didn't do well, she would still have to be sent back. His calm words left the Navy commander at a loss for words. He could only sigh and say, "You should at least give me some face. If you really send her back, how are you going to explain it to the army?" "Commander, Xia Jinyuan knows what kind of person I am. You don't have to worry." Li Jinyan only said this one sentence and the Navy commander's heart calmed down a little. He then said calmly, "I will send you Yi Qian's test results later." After the Navy commander received Yi Qian's test results, he took a while to recover from his shock. With this kind of result, it was no wonder that Jinyan said it exceeded his expectations. What a pity, it was a pity that it was someone from the army. Thanks to this achievement, the Navy commander no longer paid attention to Yi Qian. He no longer had to worry about whether she would be invited back by Li Jinyan. At noon, Yi Qian, who was not invited back, was finally officially introduced to the members of the Storm Commandos by Li Jinyan, as well as the Marine soldiers who had entered the second round of elimination. Last night, they were forced to float on the sea for a night. In the end, the 3 Marines that returned had already returned to the team. So far, including Yi Qian, a total of 28 soldiers had officially entered the 4-week Hell Week training. In the Hell Week, there was another week of extreme training. This was also a round of elimination. Only the soldiers who were physically weak would be eliminated. When the male soldiers heard that the female soldiers who were carrying weights with them today were going to enter the limit training with them, there was a subtle look in their eyes. "Now that you're in my team, you have to put away your previous arrogance. Don't mention in front of me how strong you used to be or how the leaders of the army thought highly of you. I only look at your results. Those who are good can stay. Those who are bad, please go back. No one has a reason or an excuse to fish in troubled waters with me. 1 week of extreme training. I will only give you 4 hours of rest every day. The remaining 20 hours will be used for training. If anyone has any objections, you can raise them now." Chapter 1263. Every morning training assembly was the time when Li Jinyan spoke the most. It was also the time when every soldier felt the greatest psychological pressure. Demon King Li, who was dressed in martial attire, stood in front of everyone. His cold gaze swept over them, and it was as if thousands of swords were sweeping over, causing everyone to feel a chill down their backs. Yi Qian, who was standing at the end of the first row, held her head high and chest out. Her expression didn't change at all when Li Jinyan glanced at her. Her gaze was calm as she stared at the young major. Even the waves of the ocean seemed like a backdrop to her. She listened to every word he said and remembered it in her heart. Captain Xia said that Li Jinyan was a very serious and responsible soldier. Although he had a cold personality, he was very fair. Every word he said wasn't personal because he treated everyone equally. Just like what he said just now, he was just reminding all the soldiers, not just himself, who had just joined the training today. When it was time for breakfast, the selected Marines sat together and carefully discussed Yi Qian's background. Someone whispered, "Will she succeed or not? We might not even be able to stay. She's just a female soldier. Don't tire herself to the point of being hospitalized. I thought she was a secretary in the team. I didn't expect her to be like us. Didn't they say that the frogmen didn't recruit female soldiers? Why are they recruiting female soldiers now? Keep your voice down. Don't let the Demon King hear you. Whether she succeeds or not isn't up to us. It's also not up to Demon King Li. It's up to the female soldier herself. I think it's a little difficult. With less than 4 hours of rest and 20 hours of training every day, the female soldier probably won't last a week of extreme training." Like the members of the Storm Commandos, they all agreed that Yi Qian definitely wouldn't make it. Yi Qian also knew that she had become the topic of discussion among the male soldiers. Standing in front of Li Jinyan, she said calmly, "I don't have any special requests. I'll do whatever the team arranges. I'll only ask once." Faced with Yi Qian's calmness, Li Jinyan nodded slightly in secret. No special requests, and she didn't take the opportunity to make any requests. It was easier than expected. As long as it was easy, it was fine. He also didn't like having a delicate female soldier in his team who would make requests and cause trouble every other day. Yi Qian, who understood what he was implying, smiled slightly. Looking at the young major who was praised by Xia Jinyuan, he said slowly, "I'll also only say this once. Not only was it easy, but also capable and experienced." Li Jinyan really didn't say another word. He gestured for Yi Jian to return to the team and turned to leave. He was responsible for himself and every recruit. He's his heads he was very well. He was responsible. He was responsible for himself and every recruit. A responsible man. No matter how cold he was, he wouldn't make people feel disgusted. He would only make people admire him. The male soldiers not only respected Demon King Li, but they also feared him. Yi Qian, who was always calm, didn't fear him. She didn't even look at Li Jinyan's face in the next week's extreme training. She didn't have much time to pay attention to him. The Navy's extreme training was related to water. There were too many things to learn. Even if she trained for more than 20 hours a day, she still felt that there wasn't enough time. From the obstacle course training to the boat training to the surfing training on the last day, Yi Qian wished that she could break 1 minute into 2 minutes. She was so determined that 24 hours a day was too little that it stimulated the male soldiers so much that they rushed forward excitedly. Chapter 1264. Every time Li Jinyan looked at her results, he would immediately send them to the Navy commander's desk. Therefore, the Navy commander would sigh when he received the Storm Commandos' reports for 7 consecutive days. At first, Li Jinyan could only listen to them silently. From, "It's a pity that Yi Qian is from the army," to, "Why don't we think of a way to recruit him into the Navy?" Looking at the slender figure who was training with the male soldiers, Li Jinyan, who was observing the second batch of eliminated soldiers, narrowed his eyes slightly. The second round of elimination would be announced tonight. A total of 10 soldiers would be eliminated. Out of the 28 soldiers, only 18 soldiers would enter the final elimination round. Although Yi Qian was a female soldier, her results were far ahead of the male soldiers. Even if he did not announce her results, the male soldiers knew in their hearts that this female soldier who they did not take seriously at the beginning was very impressive. Initially, the male soldiers who had complaints about his training arrangements saw that a female soldier could complete one task after another. In less than 3 days, they did not hear a single word of complaint. As a female soldier, she could complete the tasks and even did it better than the male soldiers. As male soldiers, what right did they have to complain? Will the list be announced tonight or tomorrow morning? The Great Merman walked over and his gaze fell on the soldiers who were still training. When he saw Yi Qian, who did not lose to the male soldiers, he could not help but laugh. A very motivated female soldier. Her learning ability is also very strong. After a week of training, I can't help but think that she is a Navy soldier and not an Army soldier. A week had passed. Yi Qian's name had been mentioned countless times by the Storm Commandos. When Yi Qian was mentioned, every member of the Storm Commandos said that she could do it. Li Jinyan retracted his gaze. His handsome face was cold as he said, "Announce it tonight and send her away tonight." Excluding Yi Qian, we only have 27 soldiers left. If you eliminate 10 soldiers in one go, don't complain that there is too little fresh blood when the time comes. The Great Merman frowned slightly and reminded, "If you continue to eliminate soldiers like this, I'm afraid that the soldiers who leave will complain again." Now that Yi Qian's results are out, they can only blame themselves for being unworthy of being a man if they have any complaints. Li Jinyan's slightly cold voice came along with the sea breeze. Although it sounded indifferent, it was as cold as winter. If they really want to talk, just show them Yi Qian's report card. This move was a little too ruthless. Yi Qian was currently leading by a large margin. Any male soldier who saw this would feel ashamed. Big Shark, who had been worried that it would affect Li Jinyan's promotion, finally laughed. "I think we don't have to wait for them to complain before we bring out Yi Qian's results. When we announce Yi Qian's results at night, we'll just bring them out and talk about them for a few minutes. Then, they'll have to shut up." It had to be said that having a female soldier who was stronger than the male soldiers not only made the entire team easier to manage, but also stimulated the male soldiers' fighting spirit. All of them were afraid that they would be outdone by the female soldier. Li Jinyan was surprised by the results. After 2 weeks of training, not only did he not see Yi Qian tired, but he also showed everyone her perseverance that was as deep as the sea and her tenacity that refused to admit defeat. Although he could not be sure if the female soldier could last until the end in a week, 1 week was enough for him to see clearly that she had a fierceness that even the male soldiers could not compare to. After a while, the Great Merman, who had not left, suddenly sighed. "We all misjudged her. This female soldier. Demon King, she's not simple." Chapter 1265. It's not the end yet. There's no need to jump to conclusions. Li Jinyan, who had remained clear-headed the entire time, did not think that Yi Qian would definitely be able to stay just because of her outstanding results. Without seeing the final results, no matter how outstanding her results were, they were only temporary. "You've always been strict. I'm only asking for trouble by discussing the issue of staying or leaving with you." De Xiao took the initiative to end the topic and changed the topic to boat training. Early in the morning, the boat surfing training lasted for 2 hours. They kept lifting the rubber boat ashore and pushing it down to compete with the waves, rushing ashore as fast as they could. De Xiao looked at Yi Qian, who had become the leader of Team 1, and the smile on his face deepened. On the first day of training, as a female soldier, Yi Qian had indeed suffered a lot. The male soldiers thought that she was just there to join in the fun. Furthermore, they were all angry at being trained by the Devil King. When they spoke to Yi Qian, their words were somewhat reckless. He saw this but did not step in to stop them. He wanted to see how Yi Qian would handle it. The way to handle it was very simple. She would use her strength to speak. That night, Yi Qian made all the male soldiers shut their mouths. None of them dared to say anything bad about her. She had fought against 4 soldiers alone. She had held each of their necks with a military dagger. How could the male soldiers, who could not win even when they fought 4 against 1, still have the face to say that a female soldier was not good enough? If they had succeeded, they would not have had a military dagger held to their necks by a female soldier. She did not argue. She used her strength to stand firm. Who would dare to say that a female soldier was not good enough? Yi Qian did not know that Li Jinyan was secretly observing her. She, who was wholeheartedly focused on training, lifted the rubber boat with the male soldiers and walked towards the beach. After 2 hours of training, everyone's mouth was washed by the salty seawater until it tasted bitter. When they reached the shore, they pounced on the water bottle and gulped down water to wash away the salty taste in their mouths. 6 days of the week-long extreme training had passed. Perhaps everyone knew that the second elimination list would be released at any time. Every male soldier's expression became more and more solemn. Even when they spoke, there was a hint of ruthlessness. There's still one more round of surfing training. Let's rest after that. Otherwise, when the Demon King comes, we'll have to stay in the sea for half a day like the third team. A male soldier said with lingering fear. He hurriedly drank a few mouthfuls of water and didn't dare to stay any longer. He asked his teammates to hurry up and finish the last set of surfing training. The boat surfing training was one of the many physical training programs that had been eliminated. After that, there would be rock carrying, obstacle surmounting training, and log carrying training. These were all daily essential training. Not only that, all the soldiers, including Yi Qian, would be doing more running, swimming, and physical training than the previous week. For example, today, they had to complete the 6-kilometer endurance race, the steeplechase race, and the 2-kilometer swimming race. Furthermore, there was a strict time limit. Once they exceeded the time limit, they would be disqualified. There was no mercy. Yi Qian did not sleep more than 4 hours a day when she was training, because she trained for more than 20 hours a day. When the last round of surfing training ended, every team member spread out their legs and put their hands behind their backs. They straightened their backs and waited for Li Jinyan's inspection, or rather, for criticism. Li Jinyan, who had walked over from the other side, used his cold, knife-like gaze to sweep across the soldiers who had entered the last round of elimination. Even his voice was as cold as a knife. Every word he spoke sent chills down the soldiers' spines. Chapter 1266. After breakfast, rest for an hour and then swim 100 meters. He glanced around and didn't criticize them like he usually did. He only left a cold sentence for the soldiers who stood out from the 100 soldiers and entered the second round of elimination. Although it was only a sentence, it was like a nightmare. The soldiers who were eating breakfast didn't have the mood to do anything. The swimmers' hands had to be tied behind their backs and their legs had to be tied. They had to rely on their body to complete the swim. This was a task that not only required good swimming skills, but also good mental fortitude. Perhaps they had all guessed that the second round of elimination had entered the most critical moment. Even though they had entered the most difficult part of the training, every soldier's expression was extremely serious. They didn't show any signs of fear. Their faces didn't show it, but when they stood on the water's surface, the corners of 2 male soldiers' mouths twitched fiercely. Their small bellies and legs also began to tremble slightly. This scene was recorded by the members of the Storm Commandos and included in their individual scores. Relax your body. Just like when you swim without moving your hands and legs. Big Whale, who was tying Yi Qian's hands behind her back, reminded her softly, use the strength of your waist to push forward. You have to be fast. Don't relax halfway. Yi Qian smiled and joked, fortunately, it's only 100 meters. If I had to do 200 meters like you guys, I wouldn't have much confidence. Although Yi Qian trained with the soldiers, her identity was still special. She knew the uniqueness of Li Jinyan's team, so she could joke around with the members of the Storm Commandos. The members of the Storm Commandos also liked to chat with Yi Jian, who was stronger than the male soldiers. She was a proper female soldier from the Special Forces. Hearing this, Big Whale chuckled and replied, "You're swimming well." Our Navy's commander sighed for a long time, lamenting that you're not from the Navy. The 28 soldiers had their hands and legs tied. They were waiting for the whistle to blow before diving into the water one by one and diving for 100 meters. It was time to test their swimming skills and mental fortitude. A sharp whistle sounded. Yi Qian turned into a fish. Her speed was extremely fast, and her diving posture was extremely graceful. She dove into the water without any hesitation. The entire surface of the water began to boil, and a series of plop sounds could be heard. 28 figures jumped into the water. The Storm Commandos who were holding stopwatches had already started counting down. They were only waiting for the soldiers to finish the 100-meter dive before recording the time they spent on the scoresheet. Just like what the whale had said, diving with both hands and feet tied depended on the strength of the waist. Yi Jian was not the best swimmer, but she was definitely one of the most flexible. Coupled with her high C02, she had good endurance and adaptability. Even though she was not a swimmer, she still managed to squeeze into the top 3. She's the first one to jump into the water, Demon King. I bet she'll definitely squeeze into the top 3. Big Whale whispered to Li Jinyan, unable to hide the excitement in his voice. At this rate, we can definitely recruit a female frogman into our team. Demon King, why don't you consider snatching someone from the tiger's mouth? Not only did the great whale think so, but so did the naval commander. Li Jinyan glanced at his comrade. How do you plan to snatch it? Will you step in? I think the commander has this idea. Unfortunately, it won't work, Big Whale said sadly. He saw that some soldiers had already surfaced from the water. Then, he saw Yi Qian following closely behind. His eyes lit up, and he was so excited that it was as if he was the one who had been training. He could barely suppress the excitement in his voice. Top 3, top 3. Top 3 indeed. Chapter 1267. Yi Qian did not know that she had won second place. She only knew that if she did not swim with all her might, she would probably sink to the bottom of the water and would not be rescued in a short time. If she wanted to survive and not be drowned by the water, she had no other choice but to swim with all her might. At the same time, she had to thank Demon Kingly for being merciful and not letting them swim in the seawater filled with seaweed. Otherwise, it would have been even more dangerous. When she could finally emerge from the water and breathe heavily, Yi Qian had a lingering fear that she had escaped death. After a few years of training, this was the first time she had felt this way. Especially when she subconsciously wanted to move her hands when she fell into the water. However, both her hands and legs were tied. That sudden feeling of fear instantly overwhelmed her. Even though she had a good mental fortitude, she still panicked for a few seconds. Fortunately, she reacted in time and immediately used the strength of her waist to swim. Otherwise, she might have really sunk to the bottom of the water. You struggled underwater and the skin on your legs has been broken. The member of the Storm Commandos who untied her hands smiled and said, "In the future, there will be more underwater training that will torture both your mind and body. Not only will your hands and legs be tied, but you will also be tied to an oxygen tank. Little Yi, when that time comes, you will know what it means to swim as fast as possible with all your might." They even had to tie an oxygen tank. Yi Qian's scalp went numb just by listening to it. I finally understand why the Demon King is so strict. If he is not strict, something will definitely happen during training. The Demon King is cold on the outside but warm on the inside. He is strict with all of you because he is responsible for all of you. Look at the last few. All of them choked to the point of coughing out their lungs. If he is not strict and something happens to them, he will feel worse than anyone else. Yi Qian did not doubt the truth of what he said. After a week of training, she could indeed see that Li Jinyan was a cold on the outside but warm on the inside. He was a responsible and serious soldier. His seriousness and responsibility were not only for his life, but also for the entire country. This was a soldier who deserved everyone's respect. It's not over yet. Go lie on the beach for an hour. Without even checking the severity of the injury, the team member immediately reminded Yi Qian to move on to the next part of the training. He had to lie flat on the beach with his head facing the sea and let the waves hit his body. Furthermore, he had to lie in a place where the waves could hit his head and not just his body. This was surfing training. Its purpose was to weed out those who lacked perseverance. Yi Qian untied the ropes on her feet and ran over to the beach without even looking at her own results. This was not a team competition, but an individual elimination. She had no way of helping the soldiers who were choking on water and coughing violently. Water ability and mental toughness were reflected one by one in the bondage swimming competition, which took up the most important positions in the second round of elimination. At 6:00 in the evening, the last day of the Hell Week training ended. The soldiers who returned from the seaside had even changed their running movements. They were like old men who had severe rheumatism. Their limbs were so stiff that they could only walk like robots with every step they took as if their joints had malfunctioned. Yi Qian knew that there was not a single part of her body that was unharmed. Her body was red and swollen from being soaked in the sea. Even the most basic movements were excruciating. However, the finish line was right in front of her. She could only grit her teeth and persevere. There was no way out. Yi Qian had always been cruel to herself until Li Jinyan called out a list of names that did not include her name. After a week of extreme underwater training, Yi Qian slowly sat down on the beach under Li Jinyan's signal and tried to calm her trembling feet. Chapter 1268. The basic training was finally over. The next step was combat diving. The eyes of the remaining male soldiers were slightly red. It had not been easy. They had endured until who knew how many layers of skin had been peeled off. The male soldiers who left did not complain. They were not even as good as the female soldiers. How could they dare to complain? The 3 soldiers who returned from the first batch went through several rounds of elimination training. In the end, only one of them remained. The 2 who left did not look unconvinced like they did in the first round. Instead, they took the initiative to admit their shortcomings and let down Demon King Li's trust in them. At that time, the setting sun was just right. The bright red sun hung low at the end of the sea, using its last rays to send off the young soldiers who had lost with their backs straight. Someone started singing a military song. The male soldiers who were originally sitting down helped each other stand up. They used a loud military song to send off their comrades who were leaving. Steel needs to be forged, swords need to be sharpened, spears need to be wiped. Soldiers love the military training ground, sweat blooming the heroic flowers. Practice, 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 let's practice wrestling, hey! Let's practice grappling, remember the sacred mission in our hearts. Love the army, practice martial arts to protect the country. The soldiers who were left sang. The soldiers who were leaving sang. The Love the Army, practice martial arts song accompanied the most beautiful sunset to send off their beloved comrades. While Yi Qian was singing the military song, Yiying in the provincial capital was also making use of the time to sing the military song. She had made up her mind to join the army. Under Yi Jifan's selection, she decided to enlist in the military arts. She had a foundation in singing and dancing. She could also play the piano well. In addition, she was 165 centimeters tall. Her temperament and appearance were not bad. As long as there were no accidents, enlisting in the army would not be a big problem. In order to let his daughter Yi Ying enlist in the army, Yi Jifan, who wanted her to enter the capital's political group, had already started to run around. He was trying to make arrangements for his daughter to have a good future. Ying, are you done? Sun Dongqing's urging voice came from outside the room. Tonight, the family of 3 had invited a guest whose family had connections in the capital for dinner. As the main character, Yi Ying was still tidying up her room and had not come out. Sun Dongqing saw that it was already 6 o'clock. She was afraid of being late and leaving a bad impression. She could not help but urge her daughter. Hurry up, it's already 6 o'clock. We're supposed to arrive at 7 o'clock, so we have to be there 10 minutes earlier so as not to be rude. In the room, Yi Ying looked at herself in the mirror. She nodded in satisfaction as she looked at herself in the mirror. She was wearing an aqua blue knee-length princess dress. She smoothed her beautiful black hair before opening the door. My family has a daughter who has just grown up. The 19-year-old Yi Ying is indeed a pretty girl in terms of appearance and temperament. Sun Dongqing couldn't stop smiling when she walked out after tidying herself up. Yes, my Ying is so beautiful. Look at her small mouth and big eyes. She's really beautiful. Yi Ying smiled and twirled in front of Sun Dongqing. She raised her chin and said arrogantly, "How can I embarrass you and Dad?" She heard that the guests tonight were not ordinary people. There was even a diplomat in the family. If she didn't clean herself up, how could she be worthy of her family's painstaking efforts? Once she entered the army, she would definitely let that wretched girl Yi Qian have a look. Yi Ying, who left home with great ambitions, followed her parents to the most famous restaurant in the provincial capital. She stood upright and had a smile on her face. She was reserved and polite as she waited for the guests to arrive. Come. Brother Qin, this way please, this way please. Someone outside the private room pushed open the half-closed door. Then, the person who spoke walked in and said to Yi Jifan, who had already stood up, "Director Yi, the guests are here. You have to treat them well." Chapter 1269. When the door was fully opened, Yi Jifan saw a young man in a suit and leather shoes walking in with the middleman. Old Jiang, the head of an industrial company in the provincial capital. "Director Yi, this is the son of the Qin family in the capital. You know the Qin family, right? Brother Qin is the son of the Qin family." Old Jiang respectfully invited Mr. Qin over and only introduced him to the Qin family. He did not mention anything about Mr. Qin himself. Old Jiang was in his early 30s and met Yi Jifan at a banquet. He inadvertently found out that Director Yi wanted to send his daughter to the Beijing government regiment to be an art soldier. He remembered that he had heard rumors that Director Yi was likely to be promoted to be the second in charge of the provincial construction. He wanted to enter the real estate business, so he took advantage of the opportunity when the Qin family came to the provincial capital to celebrate grandfather Chao's birthday to act as a middleman. As for whether or not he could persuade the Qin family to help him, it was not up to him alone. It depended on the progress of the banquet. But old Jiang secretly glanced at the corner and felt that there shouldn't be a problem. Director Yi had a beautiful daughter and Qin Yi was famous for being a womanizer. If he really took a fancy to Director Yi's daughter, wouldn't it be a piece of cake for him to get her into the Beijing political group? Yi Jifan clearly saw the young man that old Jiang had brought over. Not only was he too young, he even had a frivolous look on his face. Before he even opened his mouth, Yi Jifan's heart sank. Yi Ying stood up and looked at the so-called nobleman. She could not help but frown. A diplomat? Is this what a diplomat looks like? Why does he look so unreliable? Ying looked at the so-called young diplomat, and the diplomat, Qin Yi, did not avoid looking at Ying. Brother-in-law Jiang really didn't lie. The little girl looked fresh and lively. Her almond-shaped eyes were big and bright, revealing a charming charm. Also, with that slender waist, she was worthy of being a dancer. At first glance, one could feel her tenacity. In the capital, Qin Yi was famous for being a playboy. He was proficient in eating, drinking, and playing. His appearance had inherited the Qin family's usual gentle and handsome appearance. His clothes and speech were all good. Therefore, he was particularly popular with women. When Ying first met Qin Yi, she was also deceived by his gentle and handsome appearance. She thought that he was really a gentle diplomat. When she saw him looking at her with a slight smile, she hurriedly returned a smile with her face burning hot. She then shyly lowered her head, her actions revealing the coquettishness of a girl. Unknowingly, Qin Yi's heart felt as if it was being scratched by a cat's paw. Brother Qin, this is the director Yi that I mentioned to you before. Old Jiang was seriously trying to pull strings. From his words, one could tell that he was very respectful to this young Master Qin from the capital. Qin Yi, who had been arrogant and haughty just a second ago, suddenly smiled and said politely, "Nice to meet you, Director Yi. I'm Qin Yi." As he spoke, his eyes never left Ying. "Hello, young Master Qin. I didn't expect to be able to directly invite young Master Qin over tonight. Old Jiang really gave me a big surprise." Qin Yi took the initiative to stretch out his hand. Yi Jifan hurriedly stretched out his hand as well. He did not want to be impolite. He also happened to block Qin Yi's gaze from the corner of his eye. He smiled and said, I'm sorry. Please take a seat." No matter how big the other party's background was, or whether the matter entrusted to him was reliable or not, he could only take one step at a time. Old Jiang would not dare to casually find someone to pretend to be young Master Qin to deceive him. Chapter 1270. Qin Yi, whose line of sight was blocked, curled up the corners of his mouth and quickly warmed up to Yi Jifan. The smile on Sun Dongqing's face was a little forced. Especially when she saw that Qin Yi kept looking at her daughter when he sat down, she felt that this person was not very reliable. How could he look at a young girl as soon as he came in? He was too impolite and too frivolous. "Director Yi, you are too polite. I am just a junior. How can I be worthy of your toast? Every time my father came back to China, he told me to be humble outside and not do whatever I want in the name of the Qin family. You are a friend of Brother Jiang's, so you are also my elder. I should toast you with this cup of wine." Qin Yi's appearance was not only deceptive, but his glib tongue was also equally deceptive. His words not only reflected his extraordinary status, but also gave Yi Jifan an opportunity to ask his father about his work. Yi Jifan, who had been wondering if Qin Yi had some sort of connection, laughed heartily and said, "Sure enough, only a talented person from a prestigious family can have such a broad mind. Young Master Qin is young and promising, and with the support of his family, his future is limitless. I wonder where young Master Qin's father is in politics. If there is a chance, I must pay him a visit. My uncle is the ambassador to Russia, Qin Wenbo. Director Yi may not have heard of him, but I think Director Yi should have met my brother, Qin Shou. My brother often came to Nan province 2 years ago. Maybe Director Yi and my brother met at a conference." Qin Wenbo did not know much, but he knew Qin Shou. They had indeed met each other at the meeting. Yi Jifan was enlightened by old Jiang's words. Old Jiang had not lied to him. He quickly said, "No wonder I felt that young Master Qin looked familiar. It turns out that you are the younger brother of translator Qin. 3 years ago, I did meet translator Qin several times at a conference. Unfortunately, translator Qin was very busy at that time and did not say much. My brother is a busy man. As his younger brother, I have to apply in advance if I want to say a few words to him. The smile on Qin Yi's face deepened. He was wearing a high-end custom-made suit, and there was a hint of arrogance in his demeanor. This made Yi Jifan's smile even more genuine. Although this young Master Qin in front of him was a little frivolous, he was indeed a member of the Qin family. Upon closer inspection, he did look similar to Qin Xiu, whom he had met a few times. Old Jiang, who was sitting next to them, could not help but let out a sigh of relief when he saw the two of them. Qin's name was Qin's name was Qin's name. After all, Qin's mother's family, of Qin was Qin's, of course. Was. Of Qin was of Qin of his of. Qin Xiu's. Brother Qin, you talk to Director Yi first. I'll go and see if Grandfather Chao has arrived. Old Jiang stood up, intending to leave some space for Qin Yi. If Grandfather Chao arrives, I'll come and find you immediately. Qin Yi could not wait for him to leave. He smiled and said, "Thank you, brother-in-law." Today was Grandfather Chao's 80th birthday. As a member of the Qin family, how could Qin Yi be absent? Yi Jifan's eyes flickered and he looked embarrassed. He apologized, "I've troubled young Master Qin to take the time out of his busy schedule to come here. How about this? If young Master Qin is still in the provincial capital tomorrow night, I'll host another banquet to thank young Master Qin. The first time might not work, but the second time would be more likely to make it happen." Chapter 1271. Old Jiang was amused when he heard this. Officials were different. They knew how to make dinner parties better than businessmen. He laughed and tried to pull the strings again. "Brother Qin, you can have some fun in the provincial capital. You don't have to rush back to the capital." He had already opened the door of the private room. Yi Jifan, who had stood up to send him off, walked over. "Thank you for your hard work, Old Jiang. If Elder Chao hasn't arrived yet, you'll have to come back and have a few drinks with us." As he spoke, he approached Old Jiang and whispered, "Thank you, Old Jiang. Director Yi, you're being too polite." The bald Old Jiang touched his forehead out of habit. He looked at Qin Yi, who was chatting with Sun Dongqing, and quickly reminded him, "Director Yi, Mr. Qin's family is a big shot in the capital. Our Jiang family and the Qin family are in-laws. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to invite him. He's also a forthright person. I think you can talk to him. Why don't you strike while the iron is hot and tell him that your niece wants to enter the capital's political regiment? To tell you the truth, although the Qin family is a diplomatic family, they know only high-ranking military officers. If the Qin family agrees, you can enter any regiment you want." The reason why Yi Jifan chose such a high-end place to entertain guests was naturally because he had investigated the situation of Old Jiang's family. At this moment, he naturally understood that Old Jiang was telling the truth. Yi Jifan glanced at Qin Yi, who was speaking politely to his wife. His smile deepened as he said, "Old Jiang, if my daughter's matter is settled, your matter will also be settled." On the other side, Sun Dongqing flattered, "Mr. Qin is young and promising. As expected of a noble family. Only the Qin family can cultivate such a talent like Mr. Qin. Unlike us small families, we don't have the ability to send our children to higher places. We can only be anxious." Sun Xueqing didn't have so many scruples when speaking. After 3 rounds of wine and 5 dishes, she still hadn't mentioned her daughter's matter. She couldn't help but feel anxious. She simply said it directly. Anyway, the other party knew why she invited him. For the sake of her daughter's future, Sun Dongqing lowered herself for the first time to flatter a young man. We're old and don't have the ability to pave a path for our children. Even if we want our daughter to join the military, our hair will turn white. Director Yi, your wife has already talked about business. I won't disturb you and Brother Qin. I'll come back later. Old Jiang heard this. He guessed that there might be some shady deals. He knew that he wouldn't stay and would come back in half an hour. As for whether Grandfather Chow was coming or not, it was just a cover. It was Old Master Chow's 80th birthday. It did not matter if Qin Yi appeared or not. Two silhouettes walked past the open door of the private room. Then, another person came back and looked straight into the private room. Yi Jifan was about to speak when he saw the figure walking over. His eyes narrowed and he couldn't help but purse his lips tightly. He met an acquaintance. Principal Chow of the Provincial First High School. Principal Chow didn't have any intention of catching up with Yi Jifan. He walked back to the door and patted old Jiang who was talking. Why are you here? Yu Xiang is looking for you. She wants you to go to the door and greet the guests. Old Jiang, who was suddenly patted on the back, was already shocked. When he heard Principal Chow's voice, he was so scared that his heart tightened. He turned around and replied with a stiff face, Hello, second uncle. I ran into an acquaintance, so I came over to say hello. Chapter 1272. Principal Chow raised his eyes and smiled at Yi Jifan. He then turned to old Jiang and said, Yu Xiang can't handle it alone. Go and take care of her. Yu Xiang, surnamed Chow, was old Jiang's wife and Principal Chow's niece. Yi Jifan's heart was in turmoil. The relationship between old Jiang and Principal Chow was uncle and nephew. He had investigated old Jiang's family and knew that his wife was old Master Chow's niece, but he didn't know that Principal Chow was also a member of the Chow family. Old Jiang did not dare to stay any longer. He secretly gave Yi Jifan a look as he walked out and gently closed the door of the private room. Just as he calmed his mind and looked up, he was so frightened by the figure that was only 3 steps away from him that he almost fainted. Qin Xiu, the real, young master of the Qin family. Cold sweat gradually appeared on his back. Fortunately, second uncle didn't go in and didn't see Qin Yi sitting inside. Fortunately, Qin Xiu didn't come with him. Uncle, my mother is here. I'll go first. Under the bright crystal lights, the tall and handsome Qin Xiu stood there like a jade carving, attracting the gazes of all the guests who came and went. They were all attracted by his noble aura. The real young master of the Qin family was right in front of him. Old Jiang secretly wiped away the cold sweat in his heart. Although he was related to the Chow family, he really wasn't related to Qin Xiu. He didn't dare to say a word. He brushed past Qin Xiu's shoulder and quickly left. Principal Chow noticed that old Jiang's expression was a little strange, but he didn't think too much about it. He just thought that it was a little awkward for him to bump into a businessman and an official. However, because the official was Yi Jifan, Principal Chow, who didn't have a good impression of him, secretly frowned. He planned to find some time later to remind his niece's husband. Seeing his nephew Qin Xiu walk towards the stairs, Principal Chow, who was walking up the stairs, smiled and said, Your mother rushed over in such a hurry. After dinner, she rushed back to the capital. She didn't even stay for a night. I'm afraid your grandfather will scold her. I'll go remind her and let her coax your grandfather more. Yi Jifan and Qin Yi left together, not noticing that the door of the private room was slowly closing behind them. Yi Jifan returned to his seat and chatted with Qin Yi for a while. Inadvertently, the topic of their conversation shifted to Principal Chow. The Principal Chow you mentioned is my second uncle. My grandfather has 2 sons and 2 daughters. My second uncle is the third. Qin Yi had always liked to keep in touch with the Chow family. Whenever Qin Xiu's relatives were close to him, he would also keep in touch with them. Hearing this, Yi Jifan's heart tightened. He took a small sip of the white wine. In that case, it was good that he was cautious. When Principal Chow didn't give him any face and asked Ying to leave, he suppressed the anger in his heart. Fortunately, he restrained himself. Otherwise, he would have become enemies with the Chow family. Everyone in the room was talking about Yi Ying's intention to enlist in the Beijing political corps. Qin Yi glanced at the bank card that Sun Dongqing had just mentioned and whistled in his heart. It was interesting to have dealings with officials. They all knew how to give gifts. Without any hesitation, he took the bank card and smiled confidently. This matter is easy to handle. Director Yi, prepare your daughter's information for me as soon as possible. Based on my experience, with Director Ye's daughter's temperament, it won't be a problem for her to enter and stay in Beijing. You said that Yi Jifan wants to send his daughter to the Beijing political group. Principal Chow took the opportunity to look at his nephew's son-in-law coldly. Even his voice was cold. You don't have the ability, yet you dare to take on the porcelain job. Chapter 1273. Of course, old Jiang knew that he did not have that kind of ability. He did not have it, but Qin Yi did. He thought about how he had been caught by his wife's second uncle, who had deliberately pulled him aside and warned him not to get too close to Yi Jifan, so that he wouldn't end up with nothing. At the end of the day, the Chow family still thought of him as a relative. After struggling for a while, old Jiang replied slowly, "Second uncle, I know that I don't have the ability to send Director Ye's daughter to the Beijing political group. That's why I asked Qin Yi. He knows a lot of people in Beijing. He must have a way. I heard from the grapevine that Director Yi is very likely to be promoted to the provincial construction department at the end of this year. I thought that if I were to contract the provincial construction project in the future, I would have to interact with Director Yi in the future. Seeing that he is busy with his daughter's matter, I might as well take a risk. If I succeed, I will show my face in front of Director Yi. It should be easier for me to get the project in the future. It doesn't matter if it doesn't succeed. He knows that I have done my best. You know that we are businessmen. We must be careful." I took advantage of the old man's 80th birthday to arrange a meeting between Director Yi and Qin Yi. After listening to his explanation, Principal Chow slightly narrowed his eyes. Director Yi is a provincial official. He doesn't need to rely on his connections to send his daughter to the army. It is not difficult for his daughter to enter the Beijing political group. Why does he need to rely on his connections? With his influence in the southern province, he can write a letter of recommendation and bring it to the army. The army will consider or prioritize it. There is no need for him to rely on his connections. He paused for a moment and asked old Jiang, "Xingyan, are you close to Director Yi?" Old Jiang, full name, Xingyan. Second uncle, if I want to be close to him, why would I need to go through so much trouble to ask Qin Yi to help me? I'm just trying. I won't lose anything anyway. Jiang Zhengyan smiled embarrassedly. Although he had a small achievement, he was still far from the real big boss. Now that he finally had the opportunity to double his business, even if there was only a slim chance, he wanted to try. Principal Chow didn't blame him. Jiang Zhengyan was considered a promising person among his nieces and nephews, but he didn't use the Chow family's name to expand his own network. Today, he said that businessmen should know how to be careful, know how to curry favor, and know how to have a good relationship with the government. These were all right. Every profession had its own rules for survival, and Jiang Zhengyan was still considered to be abiding by the rules. However, there was one thing he didn't quite understand. His relationship with Yi Jifan wasn't very good. With Yi Jifan's cautious nature, why would he agree to Xingyan's arrangement? This was tantamount to giving his political opponents evidence of abusing his power for personal gain. Jing Yan, I'm afraid this matter isn't as simple as it seems. He is already an official in the provincial office. If he wants to send his daughter to the army, it should be a simple matter. Why does he still need to rely on others? Principal Chow reminded this junior, whom he admired, that the Chow family had been going downhill. If it weren't for the Qin family and old Master Chow, the Chow family would have been an ordinary family. He didn't want his nieces and nephews to go down the wrong path. Jiang Jingyan really didn't understand and didn't want to investigate. Seeing him like this, Principal Chow sighed and reminded him again, Jingyan, be careful not to get what you want. Instead, you will get into trouble. I think there must be something behind this matter that even an official like him can't solve. Chapter 1274. Principal Chow rarely interfered with the family affairs. He spent most of his time at school. His wife took care of the family affairs and looked after his nephew and son-in-law. He was so young and already bald. Alas, I should remind him more. He continued, also, don't provoke Qin Yi. I'll ask Qin Xiu to call him out. As for the matter between you and Director Yi, I think it's better to forget about it. Ask Qin Xiu to call Qin Yi out. Jiang Jingyan's face changed. He wanted to stop Principal Chow, but Principal Chow saw through his thoughts and said sternly, who is Qin Yi? He always uses the name of Qin Xiu to do whatever he wants. Since you know that he is afraid of Qin Xiu, you don't dare to let Qin Xiu know. Why do you still want to use Qin Yi for your own benefit? Moreover, do you think that Director Yi will open the door for you just because you've done what he wants? Jing Yan, he is a village official with no background. Being careful is his first standard. Do you think he will use his position to open the door for you? His words made Jiang Jingyan's body shiver. Principal Chow had already walked to Qin Xiu's side and said a few words. Jiang Jingyan only felt that the Qin family's legitimate young master's gaze was so cold that he couldn't help but shiver. Although he could be considered as Qin Xiu's brother-in-law, he didn't dare to call himself his brother-in-law. Only Qin Yi would give him some face. Qin Xiu's handsome face was cold. He pursed his lips and said in a cold voice, if Qin Yi has the ability to get people into the Beijing political group, my father won't have to worry about him. Qin Yi's surname was Qin, but unfortunately, he was the illegitimate son of Qin Xiu's uncle. Qin Xiu's father, Qin Dingkong, couldn't resist the secret pleading of his younger brother, Qin Wenbo, and took Qin Yi back to the Qin family. Principal Chow patted his nephew's shoulder and said, I'll have to trouble you with this. I just warned your brother-in-law that he will not follow Qin Yi's path in the future. Qin Yi, who was still chatting with Yi Zhifan in the private room, didn't know that Qin Xiu would soon come to the door. Qin Xiu held a wine glass in one hand, and his smile and words vividly reflected the elegance of a rich playboy. Yi Ying, who was secretly observing him, saw him and her heart beat faster. Qin Yi, diplomat, good-looking, had the ability to get her into the Beijing political group. Yi Ying lowered her head and only showed Qin Yi's beautiful face. Qin Yi seemed to be interested in her. Her father had said that she could use anything and everything to help her achieve a better future. In that case, Qin Yi was definitely one of those things that could help her achieve a better future. The more Yi Ying thought about it, the colder her eyes flashed. Then, she raised her head and sneaked a quick glance at Qin Yi. Fortunately, he was handsome enough that she could harden her heart and play with him. Qin Yi, a master of seduction, knew that the girl was secretly looking at him. But he would never have guessed that he had become a useful thing in her eyes. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of the girl's blushing face. Her delicate appearance made him tighten his grip on the wine glass. She was really a stunner. Look at those almond-shaped eyes. The charm in them made his whole body heat up. Yi Jifan didn't like the way Qin Yi secretly looked at his daughter. As a man, how could he not know what was in those eyes? Chapter 1275. If it weren't for the fact that Qin Yi was able to mention all the high-ranking officials of the Beijing political group and knew where they lived, he even went there as a guest. He even mentioned that one of the high-ranking officials of the Beijing political group liked to make dough figurines and that there were a few authentic paintings of Master Qi hanging in the study room. After a few rounds of probing, Yi Jifan was sure that Qin Yi was from the Qin family, a family of diplomats. Only with this confirmation could they have a good conversation and resist Qin Yi's gaze on Yi Ying. Yi Ying was very happy. A young and promising diplomat. He seemed to be interested in her. Did this mean that she had a better chance of entering the Beijing government? Not only did Yi Ying think so, but Sun Dongqing also thought so. She even thought that if Qin Yi was really interested in her daughter, they could date and get married. Then her daughter would become a phoenix. The mother and daughter's thoughts did not escape Qin Yi's eyes. Only Yi Jifan remained calm. He only wanted to use Qin Yi's connections to send Yi Ying into the military. As for other things, he believed in the power behind the jade pendant. No matter how much Qin Yi liked Yi Ying, he would not show it. When Yi Jifan asked about Principal Chao, Qin Yi sighed and said, "My uncle is boring." He could have moved out of the provincial first high school and become an official somewhere else, but he insisted that he wanted to be a principal. What's so good about being a principal? He has worked hard all his life and I feel sorry for him. Fortunately, the students of the provincial first high school are good. I heard that there is another national top scorer. Otherwise, I would feel sorry for him. National top scorer, Yi Ying, who had been listening obediently, narrowed her eyes. She lowered her eyebrows and her beautiful almond-shaped eyes flashed with deep hatred. Yi Qian, just you wait. As long as she enters the army, even if you get into the military school, you will never be able to compare to her. The national top scorer not only provoked Yi Ying, but also Sun Dongqing. She said sharply, "What national top scorer?" She even said that she got into the military school. I don't even know if it's true. What does it have to do with you? Yi Jifan had already confirmed that Qin Yi was indeed acquainted with the officials of the Beijing government. He was afraid that his wife's jealousy would leave a bad impression on him and ruin his daughter's future. After scolding in a low voice, he said helplessly to Qin Yi, "Recently, there is a rumor that the national top scorer is our niece. She has some conflicts with my family and had done something that hurt Yi Ying. My wife is still unwilling to forgive her." The reason why Yi Jifan was because he was afraid that Qin Yi would secretly investigate. It was better to say it himself. However, Qin Yi did not care about these things at all. What did it have to do with him whether or not the national champion was the niece of Mrs. Yi Jifan? It was none of his business. However, in order to get Yi Ying, who was as beautiful as a flower bud, into his hands, Qin Yi pretended to be cold and said, "Director Ye's daughter looks like an obedient and sensible girl. It seems that the national top scorer is just a so-so." Yes, yes, yes. Mr. Qin is right. For the past few weeks, Sun Dongqing had heard the most about Yi Qian. She wanted to laugh at him but could not find a friend who could agree with her. Now that she heard Qin Yi say that Yi Qian was Estes, she immediately agreed. She said angrily, "That stupid girl. If it wasn't for Ying Ying's help in school, she would have gotten a 0 in her exams." Chapter 1276. She's the top scorer in the country. I'm starting to suspect that she cheated. Mr. Qin, do you know anyone in the Education Bureau? Could he check to see if her results were real? I'm starting to suspect that she's faking it. Qin Yi had no idea what was going on. His life was filled with nothing but eating, drinking, and having fun. He had never cheated in the college entrance examination. He had been living a carefree life in the capital with the help of the Qin family. He was very happy. Sun Dongqing wanted him to investigate the top scorer in the country. Qin Yi knew that this was related to the reputation of the Chao family. He had to agree even if he didn't have the ability to do so. If Qin Xiu found out about this, he would be punished. I think it's hard for Madame Ye's resentment to dissipate. Once Ying enters the capital, I think the resentment in Madame Ye's heart will disappear. He didn't know what Sun Dongqing wanted him to do if he continued this conversation. He had taken the money and the beauty had taken the bait. It was time for him to leave. Qin Yi pretended to look at his phone. He frowned and said, I should go back too. I'm afraid Grandfather Chao has already arrived. He placed his hand on the folder containing Yi Ying's personal files and bank cards. Just as he was about to speak, someone knocked on the door. Yi Jifan thought it was Jiang Jingyan. He quickly stood up and laughed, I'll open the door. Maybe it's Jiang Jingyan asking Mr. Qin to go back and celebrate Grandfather Chao's birthday. Qin Xiu, who was knocking on the door, heard the laughter inside. His usually gentle eyes flashed with a cold light. He said, Qin Yi, it's time for you to come out. Qin Yi was so shocked that he didn't even take the folder with the bank cards. He stood up and hurriedly said to Yi Jifan, Excuse me, Director Yi. Qin Xiu. How did Qin Xiu know that he was here? Oh no. Could it be that the principal of the Chao family saw him and told Qin Xiu? Thinking of this, Qin Yi did not dare to stay for even a second. He anxiously walked over and opened the door. Hey, Mr. Qin, I forgot to take Ying Ying's files. Sun Dongqing's eyes were sharp. She saw the folder containing her daughter's files fall to the ground. She quickly got up and handed it to Qin Yi. Mr. Qin, please take care of Ying Ying. The envelope was stuffed into Qin Yi's hands without any explanation. Just then, the door of the box opened and Qin Xiu appeared in the line of sight of the Yi family. Brother, why are you looking for me? Qin Yi, who didn't want to take the folder, had no choice but to take it in front of Qin Xiu. He tried to calm himself down and smiled, Is the old man here? Qin Xiu glanced at the file that Qin Yi wanted to hide but had nowhere to hide. He glanced at Yi Jifan with his seemingly gentle but indifferent eyes. Then, he slowly glanced at Sun Dongqing and asked, Did I interrupt your plans? No, no. Qin Yi denied. He closed the door and stopped Yi Jifan from going forward to talk to Qin Xiu. Brother Zhang's friend. I'm just here to get to know him and have a chat. In the room, Sun Dongqing was shocked and said, The sons of the Qin family are really outstanding. I think Qin Yi is already good enough, but his brother seems to be even better. As she said this, she looked at her daughter Yi Ying and thought about Qin Yi's brother. Sun Dongqing said softly, Old Yi, I think Qin Yi's brother seems to be more powerful. Why don't we let Yi Ying try it herself? Chapter 1277. Save me the trouble. Do you think the Qin family is a vegetable market where you can pick and choose? The appearance of Qin Xiu reassured Yi Jifan. He was 100% sure that Qin Yi was from the Qin family. He was 100% sure that Qin Yi knew the senior officials of the Beijing political group. Sitting back in his chair, Yi Jifan looked at his daughter and reminded her, There's still a long way to go before the winter conscription. Let's see if Qin Yi can get it done. Don't listen to your mother. Also, don't mention Yi Qian's relationship with our family in the future. She was admitted to the military academy as the nation's top scorer. You have no right to question her. The matter is settled. Don't waste your time thinking about it. Think about how to get Ying into the Beijing political group. Ying, who had not spoken much, said in a cold voice, Dad, as long as I get into the Beijing political group, I will not let you down. Wait until you get into the Beijing political group. We can't just rely on Qin Yi. We have to continue to look for other connections. Yi Jifan did not have the habit of pinning all his hopes on one person. He was used to making preparations. He took a sip of wine thoughtfully and said, As for Qin Xiu, we can give it a try. Sun Dongqing pursed her lips, That's what I was thinking. Didn't you disagree? Mom, Dad means that he will go to Qin Xiu, not me. Ying sighed and explained, It's best if Dad comes forward. I should take the initiative to go to Qin Xiu. Is that right? She then asked Yi Jifan, Dad, are you going to go to Qin Xiu later? When Grandfather Chao's birthday party is over, I'll try my luck. Yi Jifan's brows did not loosen as he sipped his wine. He could only try his luck. Principal Chao of the provincial first high school had become Qin Xiu's uncle. He was especially protective of Yi Qian. He was not sure if he would be able to talk to Qin Xiu. The atmosphere was a little heavy. Ying bit her lower lip lightly, tears flashing in her eyes. She had taken a wrong step, and now it was difficult for her to take another step forward. She had never thought that she would be banned from taking the college entrance exam, and never thought that that damned girl, Yi Qian, would actually get into the military academy. However, Principal Chao felt that it was not impossible for Ying to find Qin Xiu personally. He opened the file that Qin Xiu had placed on the table and skimmed through it. Then, this principal who had always been kind to his students revealed a cold smile. Looks like Director Yi is determined to go against Yi Qian. Now that Yi Qian has entered the military academy, he wants to send Ying to the Beijing government regiment. The fact that Yi Qian has entered the military academy has greatly affected their family. Yi Qian got into the military academy because she has the ability to do so. Even if she didn't get into the military academy, she would still have a bright future if she joined the military. Qin Xiu secretly added in his heart. He picked up a page of Yi Ying's personal file. When he read a certain part, his elegant brows raised, and a faint smile appeared on his face. I think I found the reason why they're looking for connections. He placed the personal file on the table and tapped lightly with his slender fingers. According to the medical examination standards issued by our country's National Health and Family Planning Commission, General Staff Headquarters, and General Logistics Department, she definitely won't pass this test. Also, according to the political assessment rules issued by the Ministry of Public Security, General Staff Headquarters, and General Political Department, her performance during military training also makes it impossible for her to join the military. There were 2 points in the personal file that also gave Yi Jifan a headache. There were 2 points that he had not told his daughter. First, heart disease. Second, conduct failure during military training. Chapter 1278. It was the 2 points written on the file that made Yi Jifan's heart turn cold when he inquired about the application conditions. He also thought about deleting the file or disguising it, but he rejected all of them. If they found out, not only would his daughter's future be ruined, his career would also be ruined. The risk factor was too high, so he had to give up. She wanted to be a soldier, and she also wanted to join the Beijing government regiment. Going through the normal application process was impossible. Therefore, Yi Jifan tried to use his connections to get Ying into the army. Principal Chao did not look at Yi Ying's file in detail, but he knew the requirements. Principal Chao picked up the file and looked at it. He sighed again and again. You are too smart for your own good. You could have been a soldier, but you destroyed your own Great Wall. No wonder Qin Yi was so arrogant and said he would not implicate you. He probably knew what was going on when he saw it. Otherwise, he would have been kicked out of the Qin family by Grandpa. Qin Xiu put Yi Ying's file back into the portfolio. He straightened his tie and stood up with a gentle smile. I have to see the guests out. Uncle, should you go out with us? Principal Chow and Qin Xiu did not like to socialize. After the birthday party, they sat together in the lounge and did not want to go out. At this time, most of the guests in front of them had left. It was enough for them to go out and show their faces. Qin Xiu was okay. After all, his surname was Qin. He only needed to stand beside his mother and say a few polite words. Principal Chow, as a son, not only did he have to talk to his mother, but he also had to see the guests out of the restaurant personally. The topic he hated the most was also mentioned. He listened and said helplessly, although I am the principal, the school is not my own school. If my relatives' children want to come to the provincial first school, I will definitely welcome them. As long as they can pass the exam, no matter which class they are assigned to, it will be a good class. No exam. Aren't you making things difficult for me? They all passed the exam. Even my son passed the exam. This year, there was a national champion in the provincial first school. Principal Chow almost lived a life isolated from his relatives. Now that he caught them at his father's birthday party, he realized that all the people who stayed were their children just happened to pass the exam. Yi Jifan looked at Principal Chow from afar, who was surrounded by people. His mouth was cold. His eyes fell on Qin Xiu, who was leaving alone. Here was his chance. The restaurant was so clean that even the washroom was spotless. There wasn't even a hint of odor. Qin Xiu, who was carefully washing her hands, didn't look up when she realized that someone had come in. After washing her hands meticulously, she took out a tissue to wipe her hands. Then she heard a slightly surprised voice behind her. Isn't this Interpreter Qin? Was there a need to be so surprised? Looking at Yi Jifan, Qin Xiu smiled politely. Director Yi. Without another word, he gracefully walked out. Clearly, he had no intention of chatting with Yi Jifan, who was pretending to be surprised. Right, when he entered the washroom just now, he seemed to have turned left to enter, but when he went out, he turned right? Or left? Qin Xiu, who was so bad with directions that it affected her daily life, only paused for a moment before Yi Jifan caught up with her. When I was eating with Qin Yi just now, I heard Interpreter Qin's voice. I thought I heard wrong, but I didn't expect it to really be Interpreter Qin. Yi Jifan wasn't stupid enough to be surprised that Qin Xiu was here. His explanation told Qin Xiu that she was surprised because the voice she heard just now was indeed Qin Xiu's. Chapter 1279. Qin Yi is my cousin. Qin Xiu followed Yi Jifan out of the restroom. Good, someone is leading the way. He doesn't have to worry about getting lost in the restaurant. Just now, he was afraid that the relatives and friends of the Chow family would ask him if he had a girlfriend, so he didn't pay much attention to the surroundings. It was not impossible for him to get lost in the restaurant. Yi Jifan, who had no idea that he had become a compass, was elegant and dignified as an official. He maintained his identity and said casually, "So, Mr. Qin is the grandson of Mr. Chow. I know a person in charge of a company. His wife's surname is Chow, and they say that she is Mr. Chow's niece. I wonder if you know Jiang Jingyan." Yi Jifan, who was well versed in the art of making friends, seemed to be talking casually, but in fact, he had a certain purpose in mind. He had to find an opportunity to get close to Qin Xiu. He couldn't be too anxious. He had to get closer to him first. He calculated step by step, but Qin Xiu didn't give him any chance. He walked out of the restroom as if he didn't hear anything. He said politely, "Director Yi, I have something to deal with here." Goodbye. After finding Qin Yi, he found him. No wonder uncle said to be careful of him. This person really knows how to curry favor. Qin Xiu left without giving him any face. Yi Jifan, who had hit a wall, almost couldn't maintain his expression. He stared at Qin Xiu's back as he left. His eyes were dark. He left because he had something to do. Why did it look like he deliberately avoided him? Did Qin Yi tell Qin Xiu about his request? Or did Principal Chao say something to Qin Xiu? Thinking of this, Yi Jifan raised his hand and rubbed his aching temples. Heart disease could be checked in the hospital to prove that there was no heart disease. But Yingying's performance in the military training. How to deal with it? Ying didn't know that she couldn't even join the army. The next day, the whole family was preparing to go to the hospital to visit old Madame Yi. Qin Yi, who they met last night, came to visit. I've already asked a friend to bring the file back to Beijing. I'll find an opportunity to send it to the head of Beijing's political group. I'm here to inform Director Yi. Even though Qin Yi was here for Ying, he knew his limits. He finished telling Ying about the things that he had not done at all and said, "Please wait for a moment, Director Yi. I will inform you as soon as I receive any news. Regardless of whether it succeeds or not, I will tell Director Yi." Since he had taken the money, he had to give the other party some hope, right? Hearing this, Ying was overjoyed. Yi Jifan, on the other hand, was worried. Did Qin Yi not read his daughter's file carefully? Did he not show it to Qin Xiu either? Forget it, I won't bring it up for the time being. Let's see how far I can go first. If even the Qin family could not help, his daughter would not be able to join the military. Yi Jifan was anxious to create a path for Ying to suppress Yi Qian and not let the person behind the jade pendant give up on him. For the first time, Qin Yi stumbled. If he was not so anxious and afraid that the person behind the jade pendant would support Yi Qian, with Yi Jifan's shrewdness, he would not have stumbled. The jade pendant made Yi Jifan's career bright, but it also became the source of his greatest fear. The whole family politely sent Qin Yi off. Sun Dongqing was so happy that her eyes narrowed. This is good, this is good. With Mr. Qin's help, it will definitely succeed. Hearing this, old Madame Ye's crooked mouth smiled even more crookedly. She said vaguely, "Good, good, good, our Yingying is promising. She doesn't have to be afraid of that little bitch anymore." Chapter 1280. After the treatment in the provincial capital, old Madame Yi, who had a strong will to live, was finally able to speak. However, her body did not improve and she could only lie on the bed. "My Yingying has never been afraid of that little bitch. Mom, just you wait. Even if Yingying is not a boy, he will still be better than my sister-in-law's 2 sons. Sun Dongqing would poke at old Madame Yi every time she came back to the hospital. Otherwise, she would feel uncomfortable. Every dog has its day. Now it was her turn to hold her head high. If she did not vent all the grievances she had suffered over the years, her surname would not be Sun. Old Madame Yi was not in the mood to quarrel with Sun Dongqing. She was anxious. When she thought of Yi Qian entering the military academy and becoming a soldier like her mother, she thought of the past. She thought of her daughter and son-in-law. Other than anxiety, she was also afraid. If she had known, she would have thrown that little bitch to death. She stared at Yi Jifan with her cloudy eyes. Her mouth seemed to be filled with water as she mumbled, "We must not let her climb over our heads. We must not. That bitch, I don't know. I don't know where that bitch came from. Yingying, you don't have to be afraid. That bitch can't do it, she's not as good as you. If there's a chance, help me teach her a lesson. Even though his words were vague, the viciousness in his tone made people's hearts tremble. Yi Ying did not want to come at all. However, everyone in the province knew that Director Ye's old mother was paralyzed in bed. They had no choice but to come to the hospital and pretend to be filial. Yi Zhixiang, the one who started it, would always tell the hospital how filial her brother was. Even the people in the hospital knew that Director Yi was filial. In order to gain a good reputation, the whole family had to come even if they did not want to. Yi Ying, who was standing beside the bed, did not even look at it. She said softly, "Grandma, take care of yourself. I will do my best." Teach Yi Qian a lesson. What ability did she have to teach Yi Qian a lesson now? Even if his good grandma was lying in bed, she was not restless at all, just like what his father said. Yi Zhifan was too lazy to say anything more. He couldn't move. No matter how much he wanted to stir up trouble, he was powerless. He was only thinking about when Qin Yi would give him a clear answer. Yi Qian knew that Yi Ying wanted to join the Beijing political group in the middle of August. There was still half a month before her reporting date. The last batch of eliminated navies will take the patrol ship back to the port tonight, and the rest of the soldiers will be formally trained as frogmen. As the Big Mermaid announced the names of the last batch of eliminated soldiers, the only sound on the beach was the sound of waves. They stood in the sunset like tall pine trees. After several months of elimination matches, they were deeply influenced by Li Jinyan and would never lower their heads even if they bled. Even if they lost, they had to maintain the iron bones of a soldier. In the end, 9 people, including Yi Qian, were left. Out of more than 100 navies, only a few were left. It was enough to show how strictly Jinyan's selection of frogmen was. Just like the Snowfield Brigade, every member of the frogman team was a 1 in a million elite soldier. After sending away the eliminated soldiers, Yi Qian officially joined the training on how to become a combat diver, and how to use open and closed diving equipment. To officially become a frogman, the navies had to show a high degree of adaptability underwater. They had to be able to complete the training under great pressure and in a murky environment. This made Li Jinyan, who always had a cold expression on his face, reveal a faint smile that was rarely seen in a year in front of all the navies. Chapter 1281. The Great Mermaid standing next to him saw him smile and joked, "Do you feel like you're a father? You've finally raised a bunch of kids, haven't you? You must be happy." Li Jinyan felt a little helpless at such a comparison and teasing. His comrades in the team didn't seem to have any talent for language. Even he, the captain, was the same. But he was right about one thing. He was indeed happy. Those who stayed are the best of the best. We can move to our camp now. Li Jinyan's gaze was cold and sharp as he stared at the rippling water surface. He said calmly, "After the National Day ceremony in October, we will have a competition with another Army Special Forces led by Xia Jinyuan. Those who have been selected to join the army will also need to go to the battlefield. Big Shark, our training needs to be more intensive." The military had already agreed to the joint application of the Navy and Army for the competition to be held immediately after the National Day celebration. It was the middle of August and there were less than 2 months left. The Great Mermaid's expression turned cold. Time is indeed tight. What about Yi Qian? She probably won't participate. 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 The Great Mermaid's reaction was slow for 2 seconds. She immediately asked, "Which camp does she belong to?" "Our army." "Army?" There was a night diving equipment exchange training under the water. The training required 2 soldiers to enter the water and wear masks to exchange diving equipment. It was 6:50 in the evening and there were still 10 minutes until the end. The underwater frogmen's activities caused the ripples in the water to deepen. Amidst the undulating waves, two soldiers in diving gear were the first to surface. Li Jinyan looked at the time. Yi Jian, Lu Jin, first. She belongs to our camp. Our camp. Lu Zhuanhai. Demon King, you're not joking, are you? The Great Mermaid's attention was not affected by the Demon King's jumping thoughts. She was still focused on which camp Yi Qian was in. She was brought here by Xia Jinyuan. She will become one of our people in the competition. Demon King, we can't let this be one-sided. Yi Qian, who had changed her scuba equipment underwater, swam to the reef covered in barnacles. She came out of the water and high-fived her soldiers to celebrate. She couldn't take off her breathing mask, so she could only high-five her soldiers to express her joy. 3 minutes in advance. Yi Qian glanced at his waterproof watch and made a 3 gesture with his thumb up. They were communicating with simple gestures. The soldier pointed at the reef and climbed up first. He then pulled Yi Qian up with him. The equipment on both of them weighed 8 kilograms. When they reached the bottom, they would be able to increase their weight and quickly dive underwater. When they reached the shore, their movements would be more or less affected. This was also the reason why the daily training of the frogmen was permanent. From not being used to carrying more than 10 kilograms of equipment, to being able to move agilely even when carrying it onto the shore, the amount of effort that frogmen put into amphibious warfare was something that ordinary soldiers couldn't compare to. When Li Jinyan saw Yi Qian come up, he didn't stand on the reef anymore. He stepped down from the reef and said to the Great Mermaid, now he is still in the Navy, so naturally he belongs to the Navy. Furthermore, the Army needs to test his results. The competition will allow the Army to see Yi Qian's results. His explanation made the Great Mermaid laugh. Interesting. Yi Qian is Xia Jinyuan's person. We have a comrade in our team who knows our enemy well. We have a slight advantage in the competition. Chapter 1282. But the competition will not only involve underwater activities, but also land activities. Explosives, rappelling, and ground navigation will all be used together. I don't know if Yi Qian will have any problems. Look at the Army's attitude. You can tell if she will have any problems. Under the reef, the team members who were exchanging diving gear came out of the water one after another. Amidst the sound of the waves, Li Jinyan's indifferent voice seemed to be so soft that it was almost inaudible. Will there be any problems? Would there be any problems with someone who was chosen by Xia Jinyuan and valued by the Army? If Yi Qian, who was born in the Army, was on land, her comrades in the Storm Commandos would probably be slightly inferior to her. After more than a month of training, Li Jinyan already had an idea of Yi Qian's abilities. She was outstanding, brave, meticulous, and fearless. How could there be any problems with a female soldier whose blood was as cold as a soldier's? From what you've said, there shouldn't be any problems. But she will be leaving the team on August 29th, Demon King. Shouldn't we reduce her training schedule? The Great Mermaid's voice gradually lowered. She has to go through basic combat diving at least once. There's too much to learn about frogmen. She has only learned the basics in the 2 months she's been here. She hasn't even gone through helicopter launching or sniping training. The official members of the Storm Commandos had to go through 18 months of basic underwater training and professional qualification training, followed by a 6-month deployment period. Yi Qian had only been here for less than 2 months, and all she had learned was basic underwater training and some basic training subjects for professional qualification training. Yi Qian did not touch on professional training such as naval combat, combat swimming, communications, close-range combat, ground combat, airborne operations, combat techniques, evasion, and so on. That was why Yi Qian had only learned the basics in the past 2 months. To Li Jinyan and the others, what she had learned was just the basics. But to the normal soldiers, Yi Qian already knew a lot. She had touched on both land and sea. But the Great Mermaid felt that Yi Qian had learned too little. Unfortunately, she still has about 10 days before she leaves. Now that she's resting for 3 days, in the remaining 11 days, she can only touch on a few of our training subjects. They will rest for 3 days. Yi Qian will continue. Li Jinyan had other plans for Yi Qian's 3-day break. Big Mermaid felt that Yi Qian had learned too little, but he wanted to see how tough she was. Would she be able to persevere through continuous high-intensity training until she left? The sound of conversation gradually faded away, and the team members under the reef also came out of the water in pairs and swam towards the reef island. That was the end of today's training. At 7:10 in the evening, the last ray of light on the horizon had been withdrawn. The stars above the sea seemed to have lit up in an instant, reflecting the tranquility and vastness of the sea. All the members of the Storm Commandos, who had taken off their equipment and were wearing black rubber diving suits, had gathered. They looked straight at Demon King Li, who was standing in front of them. Looking at the soldiers who had entered the formal training and performed well in all aspects, he, who had never shown a smile in front of them, suddenly raised the corner of his mouth and revealed a very faint smile. Borrowing the starlight from the sky, the 9 spearmen standing at the very front saw him smile like this. Their originally expressionless eyes all revealed looks of disbelief. Demon King Li, who had never smiled at them before, actually smiled. He actually smiled. Holy shit. He actually knows how to smile. Then, a few of the soldiers sucked in a cold breath, and even their expressions changed. Chapter 1283. Yi Qian looked at Li Jinyan's faint smile without much emotion. She wasn't someone who liked to smile. But to the frogmen who had gone through several months of elimination matches, they were like Tang Xing, who had gone through many trials and tribulations before finally achieving enlightenment. Demon King Li's expression was, even rarer than seeing the sun rise from the west. As night fell, the soldiers in black rubber diving suits straightened their backs when they saw Li Jinyan's fleeting smile. Their expressions were unprecedentedly solemn. The frogmen seniors in the team said. Demon King Li's smile represented savagery. It represented that everyone's training had entered, even more savage and savage days. In these few months, everyone had experienced Demon King Li's savagery. Those who remained were the sharpest soldiers who could withstand Demon King Li's savagery. The new frogmen who finally felt like they were frogmen looked at Demon King Li's savagery, faint smile. It was as if a snowflake wind was blowing in their hearts, causing everyone's hearts to turn cold. It had been 3 days since the last batch of eliminated soldiers left. Those who remained had also begun 3 days of combat diving training. Demon King Li suddenly smiled, causing everyone who remained to feel a chill in their hearts. At the same time, they also felt uncertain. Would they continue to be eliminated? Was someone going to be sent back today? Even Yi Qian, who usually didn't think too much, couldn't help but think too much at that moment. His cold gaze swept across the patrol ship that was about 100 meters away from the beach. His gaze lightly swept across the 5-starred red flag fluttering in the wind, and then he quietly retracted it. Could someone really be eliminated? Yi Qian thought silently. Li Jinyan seemed to know what they were thinking. After his smile, he didn't speak for a long time. His cold gaze swept across the 9 new soldiers, including Yi Qian, and then looked at the row of veterans behind them who were trying their best to hold back their laughter. His expression was indifferent as he slowly said, "You have 3 days off." Before she could finish her sentence, Yi Qian heard a sound that sounded like air leaking out of rubber. Even she gently exhaled a mouthful of salty, turbid air. Fortunately, they were not eliminated. The toes and the rubber fins loosened a little, and all the soldiers relaxed their stiff backs a little. Everyone is to leave the island tonight and complete your transfer procedures. In the face of the soldiers' reaction, Li Jinyan's expression remained as cold as ever, without the slightest bit of awkwardness. You will have a certain understanding of our frogman unit during the 3-day holiday, and you will also understand why our selection is so harsh. The soldiers who stayed behind did not transfer their files from their original unit to the Storm Amphibian Frogman Commandos, so they could not be considered as official commandos. During the 3-day holiday, the original unit would send a document to complete the transfer procedures with the Storm Commandos. Their glorious deeds, other than their military merits and medals, would all be cleared. Once again, the newly enlisted soldiers were not surprised by the sudden holiday. From their serious expressions, one could vaguely find a trace of strangeness. They felt that it was impossible to give them a holiday so easily. They had a feeling that something was going to happen. They felt that Demon King Li wouldn't give them a holiday so easily. Too many feelings made the soldiers feel uneasy. The sudden holiday didn't feel real at all. Chapter 1284. Li Jinyan, who had seen their reactions, did not explain further. He was also wearing a rubber diving suit, and his slender limbs exuded the strength of the sea. He raised his wrist and said, "It's 7:15 p.m. now. The patrol ship will leave at 7:40 p.m. Dismissed." "Captain, are we really on vacation?" "Captain, just give us a quick death. What other tricks are you waiting for us?" Not a single person dismissed. The unreal feeling made them afraid to leave. After months of training, they did not even have a day off. Suddenly, they were given 3 days off. They would not dare to accept it even if a pie dropped from the sky. Li Jinyan never reflected on how his brutal training had traumatized the soldiers who were about to become official team members. His eyes were as cold as the cold moon rising from the sea. He spat out 3 words coldly, "You don't believe me." After he finished speaking, he turned his gaze to Yi Qian, who had an indifferent expression. The handsome young major asked the only female soldier in the team, "Yi Qian, you don't believe me either?" "It's not that I don't believe you. We definitely have a vacation. I just don't quite believe that the Demon King would give us a vacation so easily." Yi Qian, who was called out, had a calm expression. She met the other party's cold gaze that could dissect her soul and replied calmly, "We believe in a vacation, but we don't believe that we can leave smoothly." Over. The only female soldier in the team, who was also the only female soldier in the team who was not afraid of the Demon King's training, spoke out the thoughts of the other 8 male soldiers. Li Jinyan always knew that Yi Qian was not as afraid of him as the male soldiers, but he did not expect that she would dare to directly question him. For a moment, he did not respond. The air was a little heavy. Everyone held their breaths as they waited for the Demon King to speak again. "Marines, you still have 24 minutes. The Great Mermaid couldn't stand it anymore. She stroked her forehead and sighed. "You are indeed given 3 days off. The documents from your original units have arrived at the port. Everyone needs to go through the transfer procedures in person. One of the 3 days off is for official business, and the other 2 days are for you to rest." As the vice captain and also a part-time ideological instructor, he could feel the warmth of the vice captain every time he experienced Demon King Li's cold winter. Just like now, his gentle voice broke the heavy atmosphere in the air as he slowly said, "There is nothing extra for this holiday. Although your captain's code name is Demon King, and he is usually a little strict with you, when you become one of us frogmen, you will feel the warmth of a spring breeze." The warmth of a spring breeze. Li Jinyan raised his eyes slightly and glanced at the vice captain who spoke up for him. He said indifferently with an expressionless face, "I only have the coldness of spring. I don't have the warmth of spring." If you want to find warmth, you can look for the vice captain, codenamed Big Shark. Codename Demon King, codename Great Shark. This was the first time that the remaining Marines heard the codenames of these dragon-like frogmen. The beach was very quiet. The disbanded team members looked at each other, and then looked at the Demon King. Was the Demon King joking just now? The veteran behind him had already laughed and said loudly, "Demon King, your cold jokes are still incomprehensible. Look at what you have done. They are so scared that they can't believe that you are going to have a holiday. Don't say that you don't believe it. Didn't we also not believe it in the past? When we got on the ship, we were afraid that someone would come out in the middle of the night and drag us down." With the veterans' laughter, the Marines finally believed. They really had a holiday. In the faint screen, everyone laughed. There were still 22 minutes left. They had to change their diving equipment, clean up the entire beach for scattered equipment, and then return to the tent to pack up everything. They had to leave the reef island where they had been training for nearly 4 months. Chapter 1285. Pack it up, pack it up. We're about to leave the base. Kid, change your clothes and stay away from Yi Qian. Wear your clothes neatly. Although you've become one with the night, you still need to look good. 10 minutes later, 2 rubber boats sailed towards the patrol ship. The neatly dressed soldiers finally boarded the ship and arrived at the port about 4 hours later. The patrol ship set sail. Several soldiers, who had peeled off several layers of skin from the sun, stood on the deck and stared at the reef island that was getting farther and farther away. They asked the veteran who was standing with them, "Will we come again?" In the past, they just wanted to leave as soon as possible, but now they couldn't bear to leave. "Of course we'll come back. This area belongs to our country and is also our training base. We'll come back often." The veteran with the code name Big Eel answered them with a laugh. "You can't bear to leave now, but don't complain about going back to land later." "I don't think so. You just occasionally say you want to go back to the port for a hot meal. You don't complain during the day, but you dare to dream at night. When we patrol at night, someone will shout, 'Let me go back,' in his dreams." For a moment, the deck was filled with laughter. They forgot about their tiredness during the day and began to enjoy their 3-day holiday. The laughter faintly traveled into the cabin, causing Big Eel to raise his head. His gaze fell on the deck through the windproof and bulletproof glass. "Only now do you believe that you're really on vacation. Devil King, you've become even more vicious." He smiled and looked away. He asked Yi Qian, "Little Yi, do you think the Devil King is more vicious than before?" The laughing soldiers on the deck were on a 3-day holiday. 2 minutes ago, Yi Qian learned that she didn't have a single day off. She would continue training the next morning at the port. "I didn't see how vicious the Devil King was before, so I can't make any comments." Yi Qian smiled. Her mood didn't change because she didn't have a vacation. On the contrary, she hoped that she could use the next 14 days to train in subjects she hadn't experienced before. Li Jinyan had a cold personality, but he didn't take his comrades' jokes to heart. He sat in the cockpit and stared coldly at Yi Qian, who had impressed his comrades. His thin lips moved slightly as he said, "Gather at the port tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. We'll take you to the base for training. Focus on learning how to fight on the sea and close combat. Me and 3 other members will go together. Do you have any objections?" Yi Qian's smile faded as he said seriously, "I don't have any objections. I'll definitely follow your arrangements." Female soldiers were very good in this aspect. They never questioned the training arrangements. Li Jinyan, who was a man of few words, nodded and ended the conversation with a "okay." The whole conversation took less than 5 minutes and less than 100 words. It was so concise that even the big mermaid was stunned. One didn't like to talk, and the other didn't like to ask. How were they supposed to communicate? How to communicate? Little Yi, you don't have any objections at all. Should he first learn about naval combat and close-range combat? Why don't you ask us first? The big mermaid coughed. His dark and resolute face was full of smiles as he tried to get closer to Yi Qian. It will take about 4 hours to reach the port. We can talk for 4 hours. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. As long as it's not confidential, the Devil King and I can answer them. Yi Qian really didn't think that he had anything to ask. However, when he saw the big mermaid's bright eyes and the pitiful appearance of a ferocious beast, Yi Qian couldn't bear to refuse. Chapter 1286. You guys talk. Li Jinyan stood up. If you have any questions, you can ask the big mermaid first. If she can't answer, you can ask me. Chatting with female soldiers was something he had never done before, so it was better to leave it to the vice captain and ideological instructor. Yi Jian stood up and saluted as she watched the major with the highest military rank in the team leave. Her slender figure was straightened by the light and she stood like a lighthouse. Even when the hull of the ship swayed with the waves, her feet did not sway at all. After 4 hours of sailing, Yi Qian didn't ask about naval combat or close-range combat. Instead, she asked about the frogman's training cycle. This was a good question. The big mermaid, who felt that she had stayed for too little training, said earnestly, the members of the Storm Commando team have to go through about 4 months of elimination and selection training. Those who can pass the selection process can't immediately carry out missions. After 18 months of basic training, professional training, and 6 months of mission deployment, they are considered beginners. And to participate in their first underwater mission, they need to go through about 12 months of advanced training. In other words, it took about 3 years to train an outstanding frogman. Yi Qian was in awe. Completing our first mission well doesn't mean that we will be outstanding in the future. We still need to constantly learn and strengthen new skills. We need to always be in peak condition. If we can fight, we must win. Our country's first amphibious frogman commando team is our Storm Commando team. It's also the only special force that doesn't belong to any military region. It's a true independent special force. The force has only been established for a short period of time. There's too much to learn. Take the recent Southeast Asian countries for example. The 126th Assault Team Concord's elite frogmen team can stay silent underwater for more than 20 hours. In this aspect, we can't compare to them. Because we were established late, we need even more rigorous training. A strong country has no weak soldiers. Only a strong army can make a strong country. A country can only stand proudly in the world if its military strength are improved. She didn't ask about naval combat or close-range combat. Instead, she gained a deeper understanding of the storm. Then she learned about the frogmen forces of Western countries and the gap between their country and theirs. It was also a reward for Yi Qian. She knew that even though she had gone through hellish training, what she had learned was just the tip of the iceberg. If she wanted to learn more and become an excellent frogman, she would need at least 2 years. If she could, she wanted to come to the frogman unit to study every winter and summer vacation. At 11:00 in the evening, Yi Qian, who had just woken up, saw the lighthouse that guided all the ships. They had arrived at the harbor. Disembarking from the warship and stepping on the thick cement floor, she looked at the brightly lit Yi Qian, who had been accompanied by the sea for more than a month. Her eyes curved into crescents as she revealed a bright smile. The feeling of stepping on solid ground was very solid. Yi Qian did not return to the camp immediately. She wanted to give Uncle Jen a call to ask about the situation. After getting Li Jinyan's permission, a Marine on duty led her to the phone booth. At midnight, Principal Chen received a call from Yi Qian. "We can rest assured that Captain Xia will take you away. Everything is fine at home. Girl, don't worry about us." After receiving Yi Qian's call, Principal Chen didn't even feel sleepy anymore. He answered her questions in a loud and clear voice. "Uncle Jen's health is fine. People tend to have some problems when they're old. Don't worry, I'm here." Chapter 1287. Hearing the voice of her family, Yi Qian's mood was as peaceful as the starry sky. "You have to take care of yourself too. Don't overwork yourself. I have the army to take care of me. You don't have to worry about me. Don't worry, don't worry. You've always known how to take care of yourself. It's just that you're too competitive. You're even more competitive than the male soldiers. You have to change that. We can't be sloppy during training. You have to rest well during rest. Only when you're fully rested can you train better." Principal Chen, who came out of the army, said that he wasn't worried. Every word he said was a reminder. He was afraid that Yi Qian would be too competitive and hurt herself. Yi Qian pursed her lips and smiled. She looked at the starry sky and listened quietly to the elder's advice. Time ticked by for nearly 10 minutes. "I've received the acceptance letter. The village chief said that he wanted to celebrate, but my uncle rejected it. Everyone in the surrounding villages knows that there's a top scorer in Shuka village. Some parents even came here to buy your old teaching materials." Speaking of the village, Principal Chen's smile deepened. "Thank goodness you don't have a photo. Uncle said that if you did, people would take it back and paste it on the children's bookcases." Yi Qian also smiled. When she was in the province's #1 middle school, her exam papers and teaching materials were all kept by Teacher Tong. Some students left with 2 big boxes of books and exam papers, but she didn't have a single book or exam paper except for a few sets of clothes. "You didn't disturb your uncle, did you? If people keep coming, you might as well stay in the army for a while." Yi Qian's eyebrows were quiet. She lacked the sharpness of training during the day. She was like an ordinary girl who had left home. Her words revealed her attachment to home. "After we received your acceptance letter, we stayed in the army for a week before coming back. Because of your influence, a few high school graduates in our village have plans to become soldiers. Even Yi Ying, who has heart disease, said that she wants to become an art soldier." At the mention of Yi Ying, Principal Chen's expression dimmed. "Your aunt said that Yi Ying wants to be an art soldier in the Beijing government regiment. She's already handed in her files and is waiting to enlist. Yi Ying wants to be an art soldier. Is that possible?" Hearing this, Yi Qian directly laughed. "We all know that she has heart disease and her military training files. Isn't she afraid of being happy for nothing if she wants to be an art soldier in the Beijing government regiment?" The matter of Yi Jifan's family was brought up after a few words. Whether or not Yi Ying could become an artistic soldier did not affect Yi Jian. If she really joined the army, Yi Jian felt that she would have another evidence of Yi Jifan's bribery. The news of Yi Ying joining the military had already spread throughout the village. It even overshadowed Yi Jian's entrance into the military academy. Sun Dongqing's gloominess was swept away. Wherever she went, she would happily talk about her daughter joining the military. At this time, Yi Jian was already sitting on the helicopter with a sniper rifle in her hand. She aimed at the floating object on the sea and completed the sniping. Frogmen often use platforms on the sea to provide cover from the air. After sniping the target, the sniper needs to jump into the sea to support his teammates. He is 57 meters away from the sea and 241 meters from the target. As Li Jinyan reported a set of precise numbers, Yi Qian, who was wearing a diving suit without any oxygen equipment, half-squatted at the door of the helicopter. He used his hands to steady the sniper rifle. His black eyes were as cold as ice as he aimed at the floating target. He calculated the effects of wind and air flow in his mind. His slender finger was on the trigger. 1, 2, 3, a precise shot. Bang! The object on the sea was shattered into pieces by a 7.62 bullet made by the North Korea. Chapter 1288. Yi Qian had a certain level of confidence in her sniping skills. She had gone through all kinds of training under Principal Chin, a world-class sniper. She had already begun the platform instability training in the first year of the 4-year plan. That was why she had cooperated with Xia Jinyuan for the first time, racing in the rain, to capture criminals who sold military intelligence. Although it was her first time sniping from a helicopter, it did not affect her in any way. During the altitude training, Principal Chin rowed a wooden boat on the lake, while she sat in the wooden boat and sniped floating objects from 200 meters away. This kind of training method was called unstable platform sniper training. What was different from this training method was that the rotating propellers of the helicopter brought about a series of unstable factors to the sniper parameters. Yi Qian was very confident that she could accurately calculate the range, wind speed, influence of the airflow, and bullet trajectory. Even though she was sniping from a helicopter, she was still very confident. After the bullet left the barrel, Yi Qian put down the sniper rifle in a few seconds. The helicopter pilot quickly turned sideways and flew away from the target area. The pilot's steady voice came through the earpiece. 40, 30, 20 meters away from the sea, complete dive. As the pilot's voice fell, Yi Qian took off the earpiece. Without hesitation, she transformed into a black fish from the cabin, which was about 15 to 18 meters above the sea, and dove into the sea. White waves gradually appeared in the sea. A wave surged over, but Yi Qian's figure was no longer on the sea. From sniping to diving, it took 2 minutes and 41 seconds. The helicopter took 2 minutes and 7 seconds to turn. De Xiao, who was sitting on the Special Forces inflatable boat, recorded the time Yi Qian took to snipe from the air to diving. His eyes were full of shock as he watched the figure disappear from the sea. Even his voice was trembling. She took 34 seconds alone. Devil, I'm shocked. If there were more female soldiers like her, the male soldiers would have to face the wall and reflect on their mistakes. It's a pity that our Storm Commando unit doesn't recruit female soldiers. Otherwise, I'd want to snatch her away. After recording the data, De Xiao looked at the sparkling sea and let out a long, melancholy sigh. I can only watch. It's a little depressing. If she can stay in our team for a year and a half, I dare say that she will be an outstanding amphibious frogman. I can't keep good soldiers, and I can't keep them. My heart doesn't feel good. Turning his head, he saw Li Jinyan checking the diving equipment. His expression was so cold that it did not change at all. As the vice captain, the Great Mermaid felt even more suffocated. He asked in a muffled voice, I say, Demon King, why aren't you tempted? Only Li Jinyan and the Great Mermaid were on the boat. The other team member was working with Yi Qian to complete the sea battle and the infiltration mission. Demon King Li, who was checking the equipment, had a cold expression on his handsome face. His thin lips curled up slightly, and he looked at the vice captain with a smile that was not a smile in his eyes. He slowly and calmly answered, Firstly, the Storm Commandos clearly stated that they do not recruit female soldiers. Secondly, the army will not agree. Thirdly, she has no intention of staying. There is no need to think about the things that have been decided from the beginning. Just remember that she does not belong to the Marine, she only belongs to the Army. We are only responsible for training her. Seeing such an outstanding soldier leave the team, there is no need for her to stay. You will still be able to see her fighting in the future. Her individual combat ability is strong. Her reflexes are directly proportional to her physical fitness and professional skills. No matter which unit she goes to, she will be a sharp knife soldier. No matter which unit she goes to, she will still be a soldier of our country. Chapter 1289. Li Jinyan, who had confirmed that there were no problems with his equipment, put on the closed mixed gas underwater breathing equipment. Before putting on the breathing mask, Li Jinyan passed the binoculars to the Great Mermaid, who was still sighing. You're now on the enemy's ship. Guard it well. The equipment that was pulled out for Yi Qian's naval combat training was not lacking. Boats, helicopters, diving equipment, guns, and ammunition were all fully equipped. It was a naval combat training with only 4 people. Li Jinyan and the Great Mermaid were the enemy, while Yi Qian and the other water demon were the army. One was attacking, and the other was defending. It was a mock battle so that Yi Qian could master the skills of naval combat faster. He could only master and understand, but he could not become a professional. Even if it was just to master and understand, a mock battle training was enough to broaden Yi Qian's horizons and benefit a lot. The Great Mermaid raised her thick eyebrows and smiled with interest. To tell you the truth, I'm looking forward to her arrival very much. Let's see if she can break through your defense line and install the magnetic mines on the inflatable boat. Don't underestimate her. Li Jinyan, who had repeatedly reminded her, pulled on his diving suit and put on the breathing mask. He picked up the new underwater rifle specially equipped for the frogmen and made an "okay" gesture at the Great Mermaid. He then flipped over from the side of the boat and entered the water. Ripples spread out on the surface of the sea. In the blink of an eye, Li Jinyan disappeared into the vast sea. As an enemy, the Great Mermaid quickly gathered her thoughts and quickly operated the Special Operations hard-shelled inflatable boat to hide behind a nearby reef. One of the naval operations, underwater demolition, required the cooperation of at least 2 frogmen. This training was destructive. It required the frogmen to deal with reefs, rocks, shoals near the landing beach that could cause the landing ship to run aground, as well as shore or underwater obstacles set up by the enemy to prevent the landing force from reaching the shore. After 2 hours of sea clearing was completed, the next step was underwater demolition, the placement of the magnetic mines on the enemy's ship, and the identification and marking of the mines. Yi Qian was responsible for placing the magnetic mines on the Special Operations hard-shelled inflatable boat operated by the Great Mermaid, clearing the landing obstacles, and completing the beach immersion training. The other teammate was responsible for reconnaissance, inspection, luring, and other frontline combat tactics. Yi Qian, who had his back against the reef, quickly put on the circulating diving equipment. The water demon in charge of vigilance stared at the surface of the sea with a burning gaze to prevent the enemy's Li Demon King from launching a sneak attack. There were 2 types of diving suits: light diving suits and heavy diving suits. The light diving suits were further divided into 2 types, dry and wet diving suits. The battle at sea this time did not require a heavy diving suit. Therefore, Yi Qian was wearing a light and dry diving suit that did not allow the diver to come into contact with the water. They jumped down from the helicopter and quickly found their team members. They changed their normal rubber diving suits into light diving suits. The whole changing process took less than 5 minutes. Yi Qian had a survival knife, a strong flashlight, a diving instrument, a backup breathing apparatus, and an ultrasonic signal processor. There were no problems with the diving suit's charging equipment, and the buoyancy control vest's shoulder vent valve was sealed properly. Yi Qian, who looked like he was in a sci-fi movie, used a total of 4 minutes and 31 seconds to finish changing. The water demon in charge of vigilance heard the tss sound coming from behind him. Based on the sound alone, he knew that she was only wearing a mask and headgear. The water demon, who only revealed her head and the new waterproof rifle, shortened the distance between her and Yi Qian to less than 30 centimeters. Although her voice was low, she said each word coldly. The Demon King likes to attack. Let's dive deep first and take care of the Great Mermaid. Chapter 1290. At this time, the water ghost looked like he was really going to fight at sea. His eyes were full of murderous intent and vigilance. I'll be in charge of luring them. You'll be in charge of installing the magnetic mines. Try to reach the enemy's sea area within 3 hours. Yi Qian looked at the most advanced underwater breathing equipment on his body. His eyes were as bright as stars and cold as ice. His lips curled into a sharp smile as he said slowly, I'll cut in from the back. Otherwise, it'll be a waste of this diving equipment. Her words made the water ghost chuckle. That makes sense. This equipment is most suitable for infiltrating the enemy's rear area. You'll have no problem cutting in from the back. The diving equipment on the two of them was specially designed for combat frogmen. It allowed the frogman's exhalation to not be discharged into the water, but to be stored in a breathing bag after being processed. It would then enter the equipment for recirculation. Through chemical filtration, the carbon dioxide in the exhaust gas would be filtered out, and the oxygen consumed would be refilled. This was the purpose of long-term, long-distance diving. In addition, there were 2 major features. First, no air bubbles were produced during the breathing process. This greatly improved the concealment of frogmen on special operations missions. Second, the backpack design was more suitable for underwater combat and increased the sensitivity of underwater combat. Yi Qian put on his helmet and mask. He gestured to his team members to dive at the same time. 2 dark figures disappeared from the surface of the sea along the reef. At the Frogman training base about 100 miles away from this area, the Navy commander and the Army commander, Jun Weha, sat in front of a row of surveillance screens. The top 4 surveillance screens were monitoring the sea area where Yi Qian and the others were in 360 degrees from the east, west, south, and north without any blind spots. The 4 surveillance screens in the middle showed that Yi Qian not only had to deal with the underwater obstacles, but also had to avoid the anti-diver equipment set up. The bottom 4 screens showed the landing point on the beach and the final assembly point. Old Yang, the female soldier you sent over is this. The Navy commander watched Yi Qian complete a precise sniper shot from the helicopter and then dive from a high altitude. He sighed and gave Yi Qian a thumbs up. I've been in the army for 34 years, and this is the first time I've met such an outstanding female soldier. Every time the vice captain called, he mentioned that it's a pity that our frogman unit doesn't recruit female soldiers. Otherwise, he would really want to force her to stay in our navy. Old Yang, you're lucky you acted early. I dare say that as long as she attends the military academy and her overall results are out, all the major military regions will fight to recruit her. With a slight smile on his face, the Major General replied politely, in this line of work, you have to be fast and decisive. Once you find a good seedling, you should grab him from a young age. He didn't sound polite at all. This time, you really won. The Navy commander looked at the 2 figures that had entered the surveillance range and said with appreciation, in less than 2 months of diving training, her speed is only 3 meters behind our frogmen. Talented, talented. The water ghost in front of him didn't slow down just because he was followed by a recruit. A simulated naval combat training mission was all about realism. Yi Qian didn't ask him to stop and wait for her either. He kept a distance of about 3 meters behind her as he dove into the underwater obstacles that needed to be dealt with. Alert, 20 minutes, complete. As they entered the sea, the water ghost in front gestured at Yi Qian. He pulled out his life-saving knife and started to be in charge of keeping watch in an area about 10 meters away from Yi Qian. He also activated the ultrasonic detector to detect if there were any intruders 10 meters away. Chapter 1291. The seawater of the base's naval combat zone was a little turbid due to the undersea currents. Yi Qian turned on the flashlight and dived into the water with her head down and her feet facing upwards. Time ticked by. Yi Qian cleared the 2 underwater obstacles. She didn't even have time to surface to change her position. She immediately met up with the water ghost codenamed Big Eel and entered the next zone. The seawater was not only dark but also very turbid. Big Eel, who was leading the way, held a diving board to navigate. This time, it slowed down and stealthily moved with Yi Qian. The diving board was a type of handheld equipment. It had a graphical compass and underwater depth display function. It could help the diver navigate accurately underwater and wouldn't get lost due to the dark environment. The 2 of them kept groping and moving forward at the bottom of the sea. From 5:00 in the morning to 8:00 in the morning, Yi Qian did not come out of the water for 3 hours. She had been in the water all the time, and under the guidance of the Big Eel, she completed combat training and subject tasks one after another. Big Eel covered and guarded. Yi Qian completed the tasks and took action. After 3 hours, they finally infiltrated the enemy's boat. Yi Qian began to circle around and cut in from the back. The cooperating water ghost was in charge of luring them. The naval combat training had entered the most crucial moment. Li Jinyan, who had been lurking in the water, was like a sea monster hiding in the depths of the sea, quietly waiting for his prey to arrive. He was waiting for Yi Qian. He wanted to personally test the results of this female soldier's less than 2 months of underwater training. However, Yi Qian didn't want to face Demon King Li at all. She was confident that she could fight Demon King Li on land, but underwater, Yi Qian knew her own limits and didn't dare to face him carelessly. She carefully avoided the detection range of the ultrasonic waves. She swam with her feet and headed straight for her target. She doesn't plan to face the enemy. 3 hours later, the naval commander, who had been sitting in front of the surveillance screen, pointed at the figure that had been submerged in the sea for 3 hours and said proudly, Li Jinyan, the sharp knife of the team, is neck and neck with Xia Jinyuan. Major General Liu was a little overprotective. Your Li Jinyan is not bad, and our Xia Jinyuan is not bad either. Now that we have Yi Qian, old Dong, I can rest assured. The Navy commander's surname was Dong. That's why I said you really won this time. In the past, you even wanted to win over Li Jinyan. You were so ruthless that you didn't leave a single one for the Marines. Old Yang, after so many years, I still remember. The Navy commander laughed. This old Yang was still the same as before. Whenever he saw a good soldier, he would want to recruit him to the army. Who wouldn't want that? Everyone wanted to. It was undeniable that there were more elite soldiers in the army than in the Navy. Major General Liu adjusted his military cap. He felt that the topic needed to be changed. He restrained his expression and said solemnly, I'm very grateful for your care for Yi Qian. I knew that her training time was short, so I specially arranged 3 days of private training for her. Old Dong, I'm very grateful to you for supporting the army's work all this time. Thank you very much. I won't stand on ceremony. The most important thing is that Yi Qian is indeed a good seedling. Even if she becomes a soldier of the army in the future, she will still be a soldier of our country. On the surveillance screen, Li Jinyan suddenly turned around like a sea monster pouncing on its prey. Even through the screen, his ferocity could be felt. In an instant, he dashed forward a few meters. The naval commander who was speaking immediately cut off the topic. He found the target. Chapter 1292. Everyone in the control room turned their attention to the screen that had the best view of Li Jinyan's movements. The Navy commander ordered the technical lieutenant, monitor from all directions. Yes, sir. The technical soldier's first lieutenant's fingers pressed rows of buttons, and after a series of commands were output, the two screens that originally only showed Li Jinyan's movements became 6 screens with the top, middle, bottom, and middle screens showing him in all directions. Not only could they see Li Jinyan's movements in the water without any blind spots, but Yi Qian's figure also appeared on the screen as the underwater probe rotated. Yi Qian was looking for cover. The sense of crisis that made her feel as if she was going to be suffocated by the seawater suddenly surged. It was as if some deep-sea monster was entrenched in the dark, turbid seawater and was stretching out its tentacles to catch its prey. In an instant, Yi Qian knew that she had been targeted by Li Jinyan. Teammate luring failed. Being targeted by Li Jinyan, codenamed Demon King, even increased the psychological pressure. Yi Qian's first reaction was to immediately look for cover instead of fighting the Demon King head-on. The Navy commander who was observing her saw her reaction and her underwater movements. He smiled at the serious-looking Army Major General and said, although she only has a month of training, her underwater movement skills are no worse than a real water ghost's. Frogmen are very wary of using their hands to paddle underwater. The correct way to move and dive is to use the 2 feet to provide power, freeing up the hands to do other things. Or complete shooting, fighting, throwing in mines, or completing underwater exploration. From Yi Qian's discovery of danger and her avoidance of cover, you can completely see how professional she is in diving. Look at how her feet are moving the entire time, and her hands are constantly exploring. Don't underestimate this movement. When people reach the bottom of the water, their natural reaction is to keep their hands and feet together. Moreover, to practice the natural reaction of the underwater is to move the feet up and down. She needs to complete 2 hours of standing in the water every day. Her head and shoulders must be above the water, and her hands must be raised. She must rely on her feet to float up and complete the training requirements. After that, the naval commander asked the whale who was standing beside him, I heard that Li Jinyan added something to Yi Qian's treading water training for the first half of the month. The Major General of the Army, who had been listening carefully, looked at the water ghost who had been training with Yi Qian for more than a month. He smiled and asked, what's wrong? Did you fail? In the army, when soldiers were given extra training, it usually meant that they had failed in their training and needed to undergo more training. Whale immediately straightened his back and answered the Major General seriously, in the beginning, there will be failures. According to the training requirements, if there are 3 movements with both hands within 20 minutes of stepping on water, you will be deemed as a failure. Yi Qian's training time is 2 months shorter than the rest of the team. If you fail, you will need to strengthen yourself even more. We will use the method of placing lead weights around your waist. Each piece weighs 2 kilograms, and there are a total of 4 pieces on your left and right waists. A total of 8 kilograms of lead weights will be tied to your waist. You will be able to walk on water and do your webbing until you pass. The Major General of the Army only knew a little about what kind of professional skills frogmen should have. When he heard this, he nodded and said, from what you've said, Yi Qian's diving operation is considered to have passed. A faint smile appeared on his serious face, and even his powerful voice had a hint of a smile. This girl has always been harsh on herself. No matter what she does, she will do her best. She will never be half-hearted or give up halfway. I'm not worried that she won't be able to learn after putting her on your team for training. Chapter 1293. Yi Qian is a very outstanding soldier. After a week of underwater training under lead, she finished in 3rd place in her swimming training while armed with flippers. When the whale spoke, his eyes were filled with pride. It was obvious that he approved of Yi Qian's abilities. Major General, we all think that Yi Qian will have a place in any unit in the future. She will be looked up to by all the male soldiers. Yi Qian didn't know that she would receive such high praise from the water ghosts. At this time, she was already 17 meters deep, but the feeling of being watched by Demon Kingly was still there. The feeling of being stared at in the water was even more terrifying than being stared at on land. The physical and psychological feeling was different from being stared at on land. You could still run and find a place to hide immediately, but in the water, there was nowhere. There was nowhere to run or hide even if you wanted to. It was a physical and psychological challenge. The huge water pressure in the deep water pressed down on her limbs, making her feel even more tense. Yi Qian felt around until she found a reef. She grabbed the reef with both hands. The feeling of something solid in her palms eased her tense emotions. She didn't even see Li Jinyan's shadow in the water, but the feeling of being watched followed her like a shadow. Even when she was hiding behind the reef, she didn't relax. When frogmen fought underwater, they always fought for 2 people. If one of their comrades was in trouble, the other would be able to save them immediately. But now, there was only Yi Qian, and she was still a new recruit. Even though Li Jinyan saw her, he didn't immediately swim over. He was worried that Yi Qian would notice that he was panicking. His subconscious reaction was to quickly dive to the surface. This was the most taboo in deep diving. It was an extremely dangerous move. Frogmen would inhale air with the same pressure as the environment in the water through their cylinders. If a frogman suddenly surfaced, the air pressure in their bodies would be greater than the air pressure outside their bodies. Then, large amounts of air bubbles would accumulate in their blood, causing life-threatening decompression sickness. Yi Qian was about 19 meters deep in the water. If she rushed to the surface because of Li Jinyan's appearance, it was very likely that she would die. After completing the training alone, even the experienced Li Jinyan did not dare to be too reckless. After Yi Qian swam out of a certain range, Li Jinyan swam towards the inflatable boat that the Great Mermaid was on. The fact that Yi Qian was able to escape from him so quickly and immediately find an underwater cover meant that he had already explored this area and memorized the position of the people in the water. His reaction is fast, and his foundation is solid. Although he is bold, he is disciplined. The naval commander, who had been sitting in front of the surveillance screen all this time, once again commented on Yi Qian's underwater performance. Also, she was able to dodge Li Jinyan's attacks so quickly. Old Yang, if you hand her over to our team for another 2 years, I'll give you an excellent underwater frogman. There were a total of 7 people in the surveillance room. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Yi Qian and Li Jinyan's figures. Even though 3 hours had passed, no one felt bored or wanted to leave the surveillance room. Major General Yang of the army had specially come over to watch Yi Qian's training. He was willing to stay for another 3 hours. Seeing Yi Qian's quick reaction to avoid approaching danger, the Major General, who had watched countless drills and participated in countless actual combat exercises, let out a sigh of relief. We have high expectations for her. We hope that she can immediately join the army to carry out missions after entering the military academy. The Major General's serious voice was low and restrained, as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. Our country's special forces still need to be improved. We urgently need a comprehensive talent like Yi Qian to join us. You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.